Hey guys, tonight we slip into a candlelit room where the air smells like tallow, vinegar, and that unmistakable scent of damp wool that has never truly dried. You're standing in 1700s America, and the bed in front of you is not the cozy kind with fluffy pillows and a phone charger nearby. It is the kind where a fevered body sweats through linen while someone whispers that the sickness is moving through the house like a thief. You can hear a kettle muttering on the hearth. You can see a bowl set out like it is waiting for rain, and you already know what that bowl is for. Because, yes, you probably won't survive this if you start Googling symptoms out loud in a room where people think illness is a moral weather report. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what your local time is. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the bed, and your eyes adjust to the soft orange wobble of firelight. Someone's been sick for days. The household has done what it can. Extra blankets, broth, prayers. Maybe a little whiskey for strength, which in this era counts as both comfort and prescription. But tonight, the family has decided it is time for something more official, not necessarily more effective, just more official. A man arrives with a satchel that looks heavy enough to contain either medical tools or the emotional weight of everyone who has ever been told. This might sting a bit. He is called a doctor, though in many towns that word is flexible, like a belt after harvest season. He might have studied in Europe or apprenticed under someone who once met a guy who owned a medical book. Either way, he brings confidence, and in the 1700s, confidence is practically a controlled substance. He sets his things down, rolls up his sleeves, and asks questions that sound wise but are mostly a ritual. How long has the fever been? Any chills? Any strange humors? Does the patient look flushed, pale, or too spirited? Then he nods gravely, as if the body is a complicated clock and he can hear which gear is slipping. Here's what passes for a big idea in this room. Sickness is often treated like a problem of excess. Too much blood, too much heat, too much something. The common medical worldview is still deeply influenced by humoral theory. The old notion that health depends on balancing bodily fluids. You do not need to fully understand it to feel the consequences of it, because the consequences are about to be extremely damp. The doctor reaches into his bag and produces a small case. Inside are tools with a clean, practical look of items designed by someone who has never been introduced to the concept of bacteria. He selects a lancet. The family watches with the kind of tense hope you see before a storm breaks. The patient's arm is extended. A cloth is wrapped tight. The doctor makes a quick incision, and there it is. Bloodletting. The mainstream historical fact that haunts this whole century, like a ghost that refuses to leave the hallway. Bloodletting is widely used in early America for fevers, inflammation, headaches, and basically anything that makes a person look inconveniently alive. It can be done with a lancet or with leeches, those small living syringes that cling and swell and look like they're auditioning for the role of medical nightmare. The bowl begins to fill. The patient's face goes slack, not with relief necessarily, but with the slow drift of weakness. The family relaxes, because something is happening, and in a world where you have very few real controls, something happening feels like salvation. Now, you might be thinking, surely they can tell when this makes people worse. And yes, sometimes they can. Sometimes the patient faints, or grows colder, or becomes strangely quiet in a way that is not peaceful. But the logic has a trapdoor. If the patient worsens, it can be blamed on the illness being severe. or the imbalance being profound, or the timing being wrong, or the patient having a constitution that is delicate, which is a polite way of saying, your body failed to cooperate with my theory. If the doctor is feeling especially thorough, he may prescribe purging as well. That means laxatives, emetics, or both. You're not just removing blood from the system. You're removing everything that could possibly be removed, as if the body is a house with bad tenants, and the solution is to evict everyone, including the furniture. You can hear the language that floats around the room. Cleanse, purge, draw out, restore balance. It is soothing language. It makes the suffering feel like it has a purpose. It sounds like the body is being tuned, not punished, but the patient is now pale, sweating, and staring at the ceiling like it holds answers. And then come the leeches. They are kept damp, sometimes in jars, sometimes wrapped, sometimes treated as precious medical allies. The doctor places one on the skin. It finds a spot and latches on with calm certainty, like it has done this job longer than the doctor has. More than one may be used. The family watches the creature swell, and it is hard not to think of it as the sickness itself, becoming visible and removable. That is part of the appeal. You can see the badness leaving. Quirky tidbit for your sleepy brain. Leeches are not just random slimy villains. They produce an anticoagulant in their saliva, which keeps blood flowing while they feed. People in the 1700s do not know the chemistry, but they know the effect. The bite keeps bleeding for a while, and that lingering flow gets interpreted as the body continuing to release what it does not need. If you want a calming thought, pretend the leech is a tiny, wet pharmacist. If you want an honest thought, accept that you're watching an arm get used like a juice box, somewhere near the hearth. Another remedy waits. Bitter powders, herbal infusions, maybe calomel, a mercury-based compound used as a purgative that can cause salivation and other unpleasant effects. The idea is that strong medicine should feel strong. If it hurts, it must be working. This is not always stated aloud, but it hangs in the air the way smoke does, clinging to everything. The patient tries to sip a concoction and grimaces. Someone nods approvingly at the grimace. In this era, a face that says, "This is awful," is basically the label that says, "Clinically proven." Joke number 1, whispered gently. If it tastes like regret and pennies, congratulations. You have received top-tier healthcare. As the night deepens, you notice the choreography of care, the doctor's authority, the family's faith, the patient's surrender. This is medicine as performance as much as practice. And historians still argue whether early American reliance on bleeding and purging was mostly the weight of tradition, or whether it persisted because it gave communities a convincing ritual during terrifying outbreaks when true cures were scarce. Either way, the ritual is powerful. It looks like action, it looks like knowledge. You also see the limits. There is no anesthesia in this room, no antibiotics, no modern understanding of infection. Sterilization is not a standard concept. Tools may be wiped, rinsed, may be rubbed with alcohol. But no one is boiling instruments with germ theory in mind. The doctor might be skilled with his hands, but he is still operating inside a worldview where illness can be a disturbance of balance, a punishment, a miasma, or simply bad luck wearing a cloak. He checks the pulse. He studies the tongue. He lifts an eyelid like he's inspecting fruit at a market. He speaks in a low tone to the family, offering a plan: more bleeding tomorrow if the fever persists, a purge in the morning, a blistering plaster if the humors remain stubborn. Blistering, yes, where an irritant is applied to raise a blister on the skin. Because sometimes the logic is, If you cannot remove the illness directly, you can distract the body with a new disaster. Joke number 2. Softly delivered. It is like trying to fix a squeaky door by setting the kitchen on fire. Technically, you will stop hearing the squeak. You glance at the patient again. Their breathing is shallow. Their hair clings to their forehead. Someone dabs the skin with a cloth, and the cloth is already damp again, as if the fever is a tide that will not retreat. And yet, in the middle of all this, there is something almost tender. The family stays close. They keep the fire going. They listen to the doctor, because listening is easier than admitting helplessness. The doctor, for all his questionable methods, is not always cruel. He is often earnest. He is doing what he believes is right, using the tools and ideas available. Sometimes people do recover, because many illnesses are self-limiting, and the human body is stubborn. Those recoveries become proof that the method worked. Those deaths become proof that the illness was too strong. Joke number 3, with a yawn in it. The body does a lot of heavy lifting in this century, and it does not even get a co-pay receipt for its trouble. Before the doctor leaves, he may advise fresh air, but not too much. Warmth, but not too warm. Rest, but not too much lying down. The prescriptions are full of contradictions, because everyone is trying to negotiate with nature, and nature is famously uninterested in negotiation. The bowl of blood is carried away. The leeches, now full, are removed and placed aside like exhausted workers. The room grows quieter. The family watches the patient's chest rise and fall. You stand there in the soft hiss of the fire, feeling the strange stillness after intense action, the kind of stillness where you realize how thin the line is between care and harm when knowledge is incomplete. Outside, the night presses against the window panes. Inside, the bed creaks softly as the patient shifts. The doctor's footsteps fade down the path, and the household is left with the lingering smell of iron and herbs, and the uneasy comfort of having done something. You remain in that candlelit hush, aware that this is only the beginning of what passes for medicine here, and that the next helpful idea is always waiting in the shadows, sharpening itself. You do not really get a clean break from the sick room. The night just slides forward, like wax running down a candle. You follow the doctor out into the colder air, because once you have watched a person get gently drained like a wineskin, your brain wants answers, or at least it wants to know who handed this man a blade and a title. The path crunches under your feet. Somewhere a dog barks once, then decides it is too tired to keep caring. The doctor's satchel swings at his side, and in the moonlight it looks less like a medical kit and more like a traveling toolbox for problems that should probably be solved with rest and soup. He moves with the practiced ease of someone who has been invited into a lot of homes and has been stared at by a lot of frightened families. That's part of the job. In 1700s America, medical authority is often not a certificate on the wall. It is a vibe, a posture, a confident nod that says, "I have seen worse," even if he absolutely has not. By morning, you are in town, not a big city, not a marble-pillared capital of science, just a cluster of buildings, a church, a tavern, a few shops, and the constant smell of animals doing what animals do. This is where you begin to notice something that modern you finds deeply unsettling. The line between doctor and not doctor is not a line. It is a smudge. A man with a sign that says surgeon might also cut hair. Another man who calls himself a physician might also sell spices, because you cannot rely on medicine alone to pay rent, when half the town thinks fevers come from damp night air, and the other half thinks they come from sin. Apprenticeships matter more than degrees. Reputation matters more than licensing, because licensing is still a loose concept, especially outside major cities. Training is uneven. There are excellent practitioners and absolute disasters. And from the outside, they can look the same. Both carry bags. Both speak with certainty. Both can say humors with a straight face. Mainstream historical fact drifting into the room like a cold draft. In colonial America, most medical training happens through apprenticeship rather than standardized medical schools. Some physicians study in Europe, especially in places like Edinburgh or London. But many practitioners learn by observing, reading, and working under an established doctor or surgeon. And some just start because they own a few tools, a few books, and the kind of self-confidence that should require a permit. You step into a shop that smells like lather, sweat, and sharp metal. The sign outside swings gently. A barber. Inside, a man is stropping a razor with the calm focus of someone who has shaved 1,000 faces and nicked at least 200 of them. On the wall you notice a familiar symbol, a pole painted with spiraling colors, the old barber-surgeon emblem. The red suggests blood, the white suggests bandages. It is cheerful in the way only historical symbols can be. Like calling a guillotine a public neck adjuster. The barber looks up, and you realize he is not just trimming beards. A bench in the corner holds a man clutching his jaw, cheeks puffed, eyes watering, toothache. The barber-surgeon gestures for him to sit, and in a blink you are watching an extraction. The patient grips the chair arms like he is trying to merge with the wood. The barber reaches for forceps that look like they have been designed by someone who hates teeth personally. No numbing agent, no gentle, you'll feel a pinch. The barber braces, twists, pulls. The sound that comes out of the patient is not a scream so much as a long, wounded exhale, like the soul is leaving but gets stuck in the throat. You flinch, and you're not even the one losing a tooth. The barber holds up the prize with a kind of triumph. Everyone in the shop nods like they just witnessed a miracle. Someone offers the patient a sip of something that smells like rum. In 1700s America, alcohol is both the reward and the anesthetic, which is convenient because it is already everywhere. And here is the uncomfortable truth that historians still argue whether we overstate or understate. Barber surgeons can be surprisingly competent at practical procedures. They do a lot of them. They are used to blood. They are used to people fainting. Their hands learn efficiency. The problem is not always their skill. The problem is the era, the infection risk, the lack of pain control, the shaky theories driving decisions about when to cut and how much to remove. Competence exists, but it swims in a sea of ignorance like a goldfish in soup. You follow the barber to a side table where bandages and bowls sit. He is preparing for something else. A small abscess on a laborer's leg, red and swollen. The barber surgeon presses around it, assessing. He takes a blade, wipes it on a cloth that has already seen too much, and makes a quick incision to drain it. The laborer winces, then sags with relief as pressure releases. This is one of those moments where even modern you has to admit, yes, draining an abscess can help. Practical surgery, done with some sense, can save someone from worse infection. The trouble is that the same blade that helps here may later be used for something else. Then wiped and reused, the environment is full of invisible danger that no one can name yet. Quirky tidbit, the kind that sounds like a prank but is not, in parts of the era. Toothache has folk explanations like toothworms, and people try weird remedies like packing herbs, applying heat, or even using certain oils or spirits to coax the worm out. Some practitioners and lay people believe pain is caused by tiny creatures burrowing in the tooth. It is not entirely ridiculous. In a world where you cannot see bacteria, but you can feel pain chewing into you. The body feels haunted. So you blame a literal ghost worm. Honestly, if you have ever had a toothache so bad you consider ripping the tooth out with your own hands, you can understand why a worm theory sounds plausible at 3 a.m. The barber glances at you, and you can almost hear his internal monologue. Are you going to buy a shave, or are you just here to judge my surgical portfolio? You step back out into the street. The town hums with daily life. People cough, people limp, people carry bundles of herbs and sacks of grain. Health is not a stable background condition here. It is a daily negotiation. And because formal medical care can be expensive, many people treat themselves first, then call for a practitioner when things feel dire. So the doctor you met last night is not always the first line of defense. He is often the last resort. You wander toward the tavern, because of course the tavern is where you find information. Taverns in the 1700s are social lungs, inhaling gossip and exhaling opinions. Inside, you hear men argue about politics, weather, trade, and the proper way to treat fever. One claims bleeding saved his cousin, another says bleeding killed his neighbor. Both speak with absolute certainty. In a corner, someone is selling a little bottle and making promises with the smooth rhythm of a practiced storyteller. The bottle contains something dark. The label, if it has one, is vague. It strengthens the constitution. It purifies the blood. It restores vigor. These are the kinds of words you can pour into any illness and still sound wise. Your mind keeps circling one question. How does anyone know who is real? Sometimes communities do. Reputation matters. A practitioner who botches too many cases loses trust. Though people may still come out of desperation, a practitioner who seems to help, even by coincidence, becomes famous. There is also status. A gentleman physician, educated and well-dressed, carries social authority that can outweigh outcomes. Meanwhile, a midwife or folk healer, often a woman, may have decades of practical experience but less official respect. The hierarchy is not always about effectiveness. It is about class, gender, and who is allowed to claim knowledge in public. You pass a church and notice how close religion sits to medicine here. If you are sick, you pray. If you are desperate, you seek spiritual counsel. Ministers sometimes advise on illness. Some interpret disease as a test or a warning. Others encourage practical care alongside prayer. These worldviews are not separate lanes. They merge and mingle. The body is not just a machine. It is a moral and spiritual site. That idea shapes treatment decisions, from fasting to confession to whether a family believes a cure is appropriate. And then you see it again. The barber shop pole, spinning like a small, hypnotic warning. You realize that in this era, the question is not doctor or barber. The question is who has tools, who has confidence, and who has the trust of the community. Because those are the ingredients that create a medical practitioner here. You return, in your mind, to the fevered patient from last night. The doctor bled them because that is what doctors do. But if the family had chosen differently, they might have called a barber surgeon for a more hands-on approach, or an herbalist for gentler remedies, or a minister for prayer, or all of them, one after another, layering hope like blankets. Historians still argue whether the messy medical marketplace of 1700s America slowed progress by letting quackery flourish, or whether it actually broadened access by allowing more kinds of healers to operate when trained physicians were scarce. Maybe both are true. When formal systems are thin, improvisation fills the gaps. Sometimes improvisation saves lives. Sometimes it becomes its own kind of illness. You stand in the street. watching people move past you in their worn coats and practical shoes, carrying their aches like quiet luggage. The day feels ordinary, which is the strangest part. This is not a horror show to them. It is life. A tooth gets pulled before lunch. A leg gets drained before dinner. A fever gets bled before bedtime. And in the background, the town keeps functioning. Because it has to. As the sun tilts and shadows lengthen, you drift toward another doorway. Another place where bodies become theories. And theories become pain. You can already sense the next big concept forming, like a storm at the edge of the sky. The doctor's language last night, the townsfolk's arguments today, the confidence behind every blade and bottle. It all points back to the same framework. Balance, fluids, humors. And you are about to be diagnosed with an imbalance of something you did not even know you had. You keep walking. Not because you have a destination, but because the town itself is teaching you. Each doorway leaks a different smell. Wood smoke, damp straw, sour milk, and that sharp medicinal tang that makes your tongue feel like it is backing away from the conversation. Somewhere a bell rings. Somewhere someone laughs too loud. Life goes on, even while people quietly fall apart. And now you start hearing the word that sits underneath everything like a creaky floorboard. Humors. It is said casually. Like weather. His humors are stirred. Her humors are cold. The child's humors are out of balance. You want to ask, politely, what on earth that means. But you already know the answer is going to be long, confident, and possibly wrong in ways that will haunt you. You slip into the back of a small room that feels like it is half classroom, half parlor. A local practitioner is speaking to a handful of men. There is no projector, no anatomy model, no neat diagram of a circulatory system. There is a book, though, thick and treasured, and it might be the most valuable item in the room after the stove. The practitioner taps the book and begins to explain what he believes he understands about the human body, the mainstream historical fact you can't escape. For much of the 1700s, many American practitioners still lean on ancient Greco-Roman medical theory, especially the humoral framework associated with Hippocrates and Galen. The body, in this view, is governed by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health is balance. Disease is imbalance. If you are too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, the theory says you tilt toward sickness. It is a neat system, which is always dangerous. Neat systems feel comforting. Neat systems let you categorize suffering into tidy boxes. Neat systems give you something to do. The practitioner speaks about temperaments like he is describing flavors. Sanguine people, tied to blood, are warm and cheerful. Phlegmatic people are calm and sluggish. Choleric people are fiery and irritable. Melancholic people are thoughtful and sad. Linked to black bile. It sounds like an early personality quiz. The kind you would take online and then argue about in the comments. Except here. If you score melancholic, the prize is a purge and possibly a bleed. You watch the listeners nod. They are not stupid. They are using the best explanatory model available to them. Bodies are mysterious. Illness strikes randomly. People crave reason. Humoral theory offers a way to connect symptoms to a story. And the story goes like this. Your environment affects your humors. The season matters. The weather matters. What you eat matters. Your emotions matter. Too much anger heats you. Too much sadness cools you. Damp air thickens phlegm. Cold weather constricts. Hot weather inflames. A fever is heat excess. A cough might be phlegm excess. A rash might be blood too lively. Like your circulatory system is throwing a party nobody asked for. The practitioner looks around and makes a point that sounds smart. Treatment must be opposite to the ailment. Too hot. Cool the body. Too cold. Warm it. Too wet. Dry it. Too dry. Moisten it. If the humors are in turmoil, you must restore harmony by removing, redirecting, or soothing. This is the logic behind bloodletting and purging, and now you feel it clicking into place. Like a lock you wish you could leave unopened. If someone has a fever, the body is considered overheated. Bleeding reduces the heat. If someone is bloated or constipated, purging expels the offending humor. If someone seems sluggish, a stimulant might be given to wake the system. If someone is anxious or hysterical, they might be calmed with sedatives, alcohol, or opium-containing preparations. The treatments are often extreme because the theory imagines extreme imbalances. Historians still argue whether humoral theory survived so long because it was intellectually persuasive on its own terms, or because it was flexible enough to explain almost anything after the fact. And that flexibility is the secret. No matter what happens, the theory can adapt. If the patient improves, the treatment worked. If the patient worsens, the imbalance was deeper than expected. If the patient dies, the humors were too corrupted. The model rarely loses, because it can always reframe the outcome as confirmation. You glance at a shelf where jars sit like mute witnesses. Dried leaves, powders, strange roots. They are labeled with names that sound half botanical, half mystical. The practitioner mentions cooling herbs and warming herbs, opening medicines and binding medicines. Even diet is prescribed through this lens. Chicken broth is comforting, yes, but it is also warming. Vinegar might be cooling. Certain fruits might be wet. Certain meats might be dry. It is like food is a set of levers you can pull to retune the body, and then you see something that makes you pause. A basin, a cloth, and a stack of little glass cups. Cupping. The practitioner explains that drawing blood or fluid toward the surface can relieve internal congestion. He describes congestion and not the way you think of it, but as a kind of internal traffic jam of humors. If you pull the bad stuff out toward the skin, the inside can breathe again. You can almost admire the creativity. Almost quirky tidbit time. The kind you will remember at 2 for no reason. In some corners of early modern medicine, bodily fluids are not just physical. They are symbolic. Black bile is linked to melancholy, yes, but also to creativity and deep thought. Some people treat melancholy as both illness and temperament, something you might manage rather than cure. That means a person could be seen as sick and gifted at the same time, like the body is paying a fee for insight. It is not the worst idea humanity has had. It is just attached to treatments that involve making you vomit until you see your ancestors. The practitioner continues, describing how bleeding is not random. It is timed. It is measured. Sometimes it can be done from different sites depending on the ailment. Headache, bleed near the head or from the arm. Lung trouble. Choose a vein thought to relieve the chest. There is a whole geography of the body mapped by theory, not anatomy. You remember the bowl from section 1, the slow fill of blood, the calm ritual. Now you understand why it felt so normal to them. It was not cruelty. It was coherence. In their minds, they were restoring balance, like adjusting sails in rough wind. But coherence is not the same as truth. You can have a beautifully consistent map that leads you straight into a swamp. You step outside again, and the world feels thick with this logic. A woman at a market stall tells another woman her child's rash is hot, so she should avoid warming foods and give something cooling. A man complains of heaviness in the head, and someone suggests a purge to clear the gross humors. The language shapes everything, right down to how people describe themselves. They are not just tired, they are heavy. They are not just anxious, they are heated. A part of you wants to laugh, because it is so elaborate, so confident, so like watching someone build a cathedral out of assumptions. But you also feel the human need beneath it. People are trying to make sense of suffering with the tools they have. Now comes the moment where the theory gets personal. You feel a tightness in your own throat, a small cough that might be smoke irritation or just your imagination reacting to too much historical atmosphere. Someone nearby hears it and turns. They look at you with the quick diagnostic gaze of a world that cannot afford to ignore symptoms. Phlegm, they say. Like they have spotted an old friend. Before you can protest, you are shepherded toward a bench, and a cup of something steaming appears in your hands. It smells like herbs and bitterness, and the kind of hope that is slightly panicked. The person offering it tells you it will open your chest, move the phlegm, and restore balance. You sip. Your face tries to escape your skull. Joke number 1. It tastes like a pine tree got into a fist fight with a chimney. The person nods. Pleased. Good, they say. It is strong. Of course it is. They ask what you have been eating. You mention bread, perhaps, and they warn you about dampness. They tell you to avoid cold drinks. They advise walking, but not too much. Rest, but not too much. Warmth, but not too much. Again, the endless contradictions of a system trying to control a chaotic universe. Then they mention something that makes you go still. Black bile. Melancholy. They explain can settle in the body. It can stagnate. It can poison the mind. If you are sad, sluggish, withdrawn, that could be black bile weighing you down. The cure might involve purging, bleeding, exercise, changes in diet, and spiritual guidance. In a world where mental health is not separated from physical health, the mind is treated like another organ that can be drained, heated, cooled, or scolded into compliance. Historians still argue whether this blending of mind and body was harmful because it led to brutal physical treatments for emotional suffering, or helpful because it acknowledged that grief proves stress and fear shape the body. Again, maybe both. The recognition is real. The remedies are often not. You look around at the faces, at the serious nods, at the quiet determination to manage life with theory and ritual. You realize humors are not just a medical idea. They are a cultural language. They give people a way to talk about the invisible, and yet, tucked beneath all that language, another world exists. A world of plants, practical observation, women's knowledge passed in kitchens, indigenous remedies learned at the edge of settlements. That world does not always speak in humors. It speaks in roots and bark, in trial and error, in "this helped my grandmother," and in "this plant will make you regret your choices." Your cough settles, maybe because the air changes, maybe because your nervous system wants to stop being noticed. You hand back the cup with gratitude, even as your taste buds file a complaint. The day begins to tilt toward evening again, and you feel the story pulling you toward another group of healers, another kind of authority, the ones who often work quietly, without official titles, without satchels full of blades, the ones who know which leaves soothe and which ones kill, and who have to practice their craft under suspicion. Because in 1700s America, a woman who heals is sometimes called a blessing, and sometimes she is called something else. You drift away from the little lecture room with humors still echoing in your ears, and the air outside feels different, as if the town is exhaling after listening to itself talk. You follow the smell of crushed green things, that sharp, living scent like stems snapped in a fist. It leads you behind a house where a small garden clings to the soil like it is trying to prove a point. The beds are messy, practical, full of plants that are not pretty in the decorative way, but purposeful in the this might stop you from dying way. A woman kneels there, sleeves rolled up, fingers dark with dirt. She does not look up right away. She's busy doing the kind of work that does not need applause. When she finally turns, her face is calm and watchful, the way you get when people have doubted you your whole life and you have learned to keep your receipts in your head. This is the world humoral theory doesn't fully own, the world of midwives, herbalists, family healers, and women whose knowledge lives in kitchens and gardens and the quiet corners of communities. It is not that they never talk about humors. Sometimes they do, because the language is everywhere, but their craft is built as much on practical observation as on theory. What stops bleeding? What eases a cough? What helps a laboring body? What brings down a fever? Even if you cannot explain why. Mainstream historical fact, spoken softly. In 1700s America, midwives are central to childbirth and women's health care. Physicians exist, but in many communities, especially rural ones, midwives handle most deliveries and much of the reproductive knowledge. Their skills are learned through apprenticeship, experience, and oral tradition, not formal schooling. In other words, you can be the most important medical professional in town and still not be invited into the official conversation about medicine. The woman invites you closer. Not with warmth exactly, but with that brisk practicality that says, if you're here, make yourself useful. She shows you bundles drying in the shade, yarrow, mint, maybe chamomile. She points out plants with names that sound gentle and plants that look gentle but are not. Some are for soothing, some are for purging, some are for pain, some are for bringing things on, which is a phrase that can mean menstruation, labor, or trouble, depending on context. She talks about births the way a sailor talks about storms, not with fear, exactly, but with respect. Childbirth in this era is risky. Infection, hemorrhage, obstructed labor, postpartum complications, they are all common threats. Midwives are trained to read bodies and respond quickly with what they have. Their tools are simple. Clean cloth, warm water, herbs, hands, experience. Their real instrument is judgment. You notice how the house feels different from the doctor's sick room. Less like a stage, more like a workshop. The midwife does not need to perform authority the same way. Her authority is embedded in stories. The babies she has delivered, the mothers she has saved, the quiet tragedies she has witnessed. In a community where women gather around a laboring mother, knowledge spreads through proximity, through doing, and yet you also feel the tension that follows women healers in this era like a shadow. The midwife's knowledge can make her respected, but it can also make her suspicious. Because a woman who knows too much has always made certain kinds of people uncomfortable. You hear whispers from neighbors as you pass. She's skilled, she's odd, she has herbs from strange places. She knows things she shouldn't. This is where the witch word hangs, not always spoken, but hovering. Actual witch trials are earlier in the timeline in many places, but suspicion does not vanish just because a court stops holding hearings. Cultural fear has a long half-life. If a baby dies, if a mother hemorrhages, if a family is grieving and furious and needs a target, the woman who touched the body becomes an easy story to tell. Historians still argue whether accusations of witchcraft in colonial America were primarily about spiritual panic, or whether they were also a way communities policed women's roles. especially those who held informal power through healing and midwifery. You can feel the debate in the air, because both forces can be true at once. Fear of the supernatural and fear of women's competence often share a spine, the midwife. Meanwhile, keeps working. She crushes leaves in a mortar, and the sound is steady, soothing like soft percussion. She mixes a poultice for swelling, explaining that it draws heat out. There's the humoral language again, sneaking in. But the method is grounded in what she has seen. This reduces redness. This calms pain. This helps a wound close. She shows you willow bark, or at least talks about it. Something known in various traditions for easing pain and fever. People in this time do not know the exact chemistry, but the effect is real enough to be remembered. She also mentions plants that make you sweat, plants that make you pee, plants that make you vomit. Yes, even the herbal world has its own version of let's expel the problem, because sometimes expelling does help. The body clears toxins and infections in messy ways, and older medicine learns to imitate that mess. Quirky tidbit, whispered like a secret you will carry into your dreams. Some households keep little handwritten remedy books, often maintained by women, filled with recipes for treating everything from burns to fits to melancholy. These books are part medical guide, part family memoir, part desperate poetry. The measurements are vague: a handful, a pinch, a spoon. The instructions include modern-sounding observations like, if it worsens, stop, right alongside mystical bits like gather at dawn or speak a prayer while stirring. It is science and ritual braided together, and honestly, your modern world still does this, just with branded supplements and motivational quotes. A knock sounds at the door. A young girl arrives breathless, cheeks flushed. "It's Mother," she says. "Her pains started, and now she's tired." The midwife's face changes in an instant. Not panic, not drama, just focus. She wraps her bundles, grabs cloth, and gestures for you to follow if you're not going to faint. You promise yourself you will not faint, because fainting is embarrassing. And also because nobody in the 1700s has time to deal with your modern sensitivities. The walk to the other house is quick. Inside, the air is warm and thick. Women hover near the bed, murmuring reassurance. The laboring mother lies with sweat on her brow, eyes half closed, lips pressed tight. The room feels intimate, serious, and strangely communal. Men are mostly absent. This is women's territory, a private sphere of pain and endurance. The midwife takes over without needing to raise her voice. She checks the mother's pulse, her breathing, the timing of contractions. She asks calm questions. She offers water. She changes the position of the mother's body with gentle firmness. She's reading the situation like a map. Time stretches. The mother groans through another contraction. Someone wipes her forehead. Someone whispers encouragement that sounds half like prayer and half like a pep talk. You realize that in this era, comfort is part of medicine. Touch is part of medicine. Community is part of medicine. The treatments are not just substances. They are structure. Still, danger is always nearby. If the labor stalls, if bleeding begins, if the baby is positioned wrong, the options are limited. A physician might be called in extreme circumstances, but that can mean instruments and interventions that are terrifying in a world without anesthesia. Midwives often try to avoid that escalation, balancing between letting the body work and recognizing when it is failing. The mother's face tightens again. The midwife murmurs instructions. The women around the bed breathe with her, like the room itself is helping push. And then, After what feels like a full season of time compressed into minutes, you hear a cry, a sharp, thin sound that slices through the heavy air. The baby is born. Relief floods the room, warm and trembling. Someone laughs, someone cries, someone thanks God. The midwife cleans the child, checks the mother, manages the placenta, watches closely for bleeding. She does not relax until she knows the danger has passed, because she knows what can happen in the hours after birth, when the room feels safe and everyone thinks the story is over. When she finally sits back, you see the exhaustion in her shoulders, the quiet cost of being the person who stands between life and loss again and again. Outside, later, the night air feels cooler, and you can hear the distant sound of insects. The midwife walks with you for a few steps. She speaks softly now, as if the day has taken something from her, and she's not sure she wants to spend more energy explaining herself. She tells you about herbs she learned from her mother and from other women, and sometimes from indigenous neighbors when relationships allow it. She admits that some remedies are guesswork, but they are informed guesswork. She also admits that sometimes nothing works, and the family will blame someone anyway. You do what you can, she says, and you hope you are forgiven when it is not enough. Historians still argue whether women healers in colonial America were pushed to the margins mainly by rising professional medicine, or whether the marginalization was also driven by broader social anxiety about women's authority. But standing here, listening to her, you can feel the answer is not clean. It is layered, tradition colliding with change, knowledge colliding with power. As you part ways, you glance back at her garden, at the dried bundles and crushed leaves. This is medicine too, not polished, not standardized, but rooted, lived, passed hand to hand. And now, as the town settles into sleep, you notice another kind of fear spreading through whispers. Not about a single birth, not about one family's tragedy, but about a sickness that moves from house to house and leaves scars like signatures. Smallpox. You feel the story tugging you toward it. Because in 1700s America, few words carry as much dread, and few treatments feel as desperate, as risky, and as controversial as what people try next. The word smallpox moves through town like a draft that sneaks under doors. You hear it in half-closed sentences, in the way mothers pull children closer, in the way men suddenly find reasons not to shake hands. People do not talk about it the way they talk about a regular fever. They talk about it the way you talk about fire when the wind is high. You walk past a house where the shutters are drawn even though the day is bright. A strip of cloth hangs on the door like a warning flag. Inside, you can hear a cough that sounds dry and relentless. Someone is praying, but it is the tense kind of prayer, the kind that has bargaining in it. Smallpox is not just sickness here. It is an event. It arrives. It spreads. It marks. It kills. And if it spares you, it leaves you altered. Survivors carry scars like a map of where they have been, and everyone knows it. So when you hear that some people are doing something that sounds like inviting danger on purpose, you stop in the street like you have hit an invisible wall. They call it inoculation or variolation, depending on who you ask and how educated they want to sound while scaring you. You follow the whispers to a parlor where a small group has gathered, faces tight with that special expression people get when they are trying to be brave and also trying not to vomit. A man at the center speaks in low, persuasive tones. He explains that if you take material from a smallpox or the matter and introduce it into the body of a healthy person through a small cut or scratch, you can provoke a milder infection. That milder infection, if it does not kill you, may protect you from a future, more deadly case. Your modern brain lights up like a lantern. You recognize the shape of the idea, even if the method makes your skin crawl. A controlled exposure to build immunity, long before the word immunity is used the way you know it, a dangerous predecessor to vaccination. And yes, this is a mainstream historical fact. Variolation is practiced in the American colonies during the 1700s, notably during smallpox outbreaks, and it becomes a fiercely debated practice. Some promote it as a life-saving innovation. Others condemn it as reckless, unnatural, or morally wrong. You watch the listeners react, because you can see both sides unfolding in real time. On the one hand, smallpox is terrifying if you're going to face it anyway. Maybe you would rather face it under supervision, with care, in a controlled setting. On the other hand, the procedure involves deliberately infecting a healthy person, and during the period they are sick, they can spread smallpox to others. It is like trying to control a wildfire by lighting a smaller one in your living room and insisting it will behave. Someone mutters, "So you give yourself smallpox?" "On purpose." The man nods, as if this is perfectly normal. "A milder form," he insists, which is the 1700s version of, "It's just a little side effect." You can feel the room's fear thicken. A mother's hand drifts to her child's shoulder, protective without realizing it. A father's jaw clenches, because being responsible for a family in this era means constantly choosing between bad and worse. Historians still argue whether early variolation campaigns in the colonies were primarily driven by medical reasoning, or whether they spread because communities were desperate for any tool that felt like control. The truth, standing here, feels like both. Medical reasoning offers a path. Desperation provides the legs to walk it. You learn quickly that not everyone can access this procedure. It often requires money, connections, or proximity to someone willing to do it. And even if you can access it, there are social barriers. Some ministers preach against it, arguing that preventing a disease is meddling with divine will. Others support it, seeing it as using God-given intelligence. The same Bible can be used as a shield for either argument, depending on which fear you want to feed. Then you hear the strangest phrase drift across the room, said with a nervous laugh. Smallpox parties. Not parties in the modern balloons and snacks sense, but gatherings where people expose children to smallpox intentionally, hoping they catch it at a time when they are strong and can be watched. It is a folk version of variolation without the careful incision, sometimes relying on proximity and contaminated materials. The idea is the same: better now, better mild, better controlled. But controlled is a generous word when you are essentially inviting a killer into your home and asking it to please keep its shoes on. Joke number 1. Very soft. It is like hosting a dinner for a bear because you heard the bear might be less hungry if it arrives early. Everyone smiles politely while checking the exits. In one household you visit, the preparations are almost ceremonial. The children are washed. Their bedding is set aside. Extra cloth is laid out. Someone mentions threads, and you realize they are talking about using a bit of material that has been in contact with smallpox sores. The concept is to transfer the infection with something tangible, like passing along a spark. A woman holds a strip of cloth with 2 fingers, as if it might bite. The father watches it the way you might watch a loaded musket. The room goes quiet. The decision is made, not with confidence, but with the exhausted courage of people who have already watched neighbors bury their children. You do not see every step, but you hear enough to feel your stomach tighten. A small scratch, a dab of infectious material, a prayer whispered under the breath. Because in 1700s America, you hedge your bets with heaven whenever possible. The next days are tense. The children develop fever, aches, and the first signs of eruption. Everyone counts the spots like they are watching the sky for storm clouds. Is it mild? Is it turning? Is it becoming the real thing? A few houses away, another family refuses variolation entirely. They bar their doors, burn vinegar and herbs, and hope the fumes will keep sickness away. They blame inoculators for spreading the outbreak. They are not entirely wrong to worry, because variolated individuals can transmit smallpox. Communities sometimes fear that inoculation efforts, even if protective for the individual, endanger the public. This is the uncomfortable math of early public health. What helps one person might threaten another. Joke number 2, whispered. It is the first time you see a neighborhood argument that feels like a comment section, except instead of caps lock, people have pitchfork energy. You meet a practitioner willing to perform variolation. He speaks carefully, because he has learned that confidence can be dangerous when outcomes are uncertain. He explains the process with a calm tone meant to soothe. Select material from a mild case if possible. Introduce it through a controlled cut, then keep the patient isolated until recovery. Isolation is crucial. Without it, the whole effort can become a spreading event. The problem, of course, is that isolation is hard in cramped towns and crowded households. People share rooms, they share tools, they share food, they share air. So even when someone tries to be responsible, the disease finds roots. And then there is the ethical argument, the one that curls through the room like smoke. Is it right to risk causing illness, even mild illness, in a healthy person? Some say yes, because smallpox will come anyway, and this reduces the chance of death. Some say no, because intentionally causing harm is morally wrong, and because it risks spreading disease to innocents. Historians still argue whether opposition to variolation was mostly religious conservatism, or whether it was a rational response to real risks and uneven implementation. Again, both explanations can sit side by side. People are not simply foolish or enlightened. They are calculating with fear as their calculator. You watch the town's social fabric tighten. Families who inoculate are viewed with suspicion by those who do not. Those who do not inoculate are viewed as reckless by those who do. The disease becomes not only a biological threat, but a social one, exposing fault lines in trust, class, and authority. In the midst of all this, you notice something quietly revolutionary: the idea that a disease might be prevented, not just treated after it arrives. That is a profound shift. It is fragile, controversial, risky, and imperfect, but it is a step toward a different relationship with illness. Instead of resigning yourself to fate, you try to negotiate with it. You try to preempt it. You walk past a graveyard and see fresh earth. You walk past a house and see a survivor's face, pitted with scars, eyes older than they should be. You walk past another house and hear a child laughing, and for a moment, the sound feels like a miracle, like the world hasn't been entirely swallowed by fear. Joke number 3, very gentle. You almost want to tell the laughing child to enjoy it while they can. But then you remember you are the weird time traveler in this situation and maybe should not start handing out existential dread like candy. By the end of the week, one inoculated child recovers quickly, spots fading, strength returning. Another struggles longer, fever high, family frantic. The procedure is not a guarantee. It is a gamble with better odds than doing nothing, but still a gamble. And in a century where chance already governs so much, people cling to any method that feels like a choice. As evening settles, you realize smallpox has done more than scar bodies. It has forced communities to argue about responsibility, about risk, about whether saving your child can endanger someone else's. It is a debate that feels strangely modern, even if the tools are crude and the language is different. You stand in the cooling air and watch smoke rise from chimneys. Somewhere, a family is isolating a variolated child, hoping their courage does not turn into catastrophe. Somewhere else, a family is barricading their door, hoping purity and prayer will hold the line. And you, caught between them. Feel the weight of medicine in this era. It is not only about healing, it is about choosing which fear you can live with. The next thing you hear, just as the town quiets, is a rumor about teeth, about worms, about drills, about a cure that involves heat and metal and a level of bravery that makes your palms sweat. Your jaw aches sympathetically already. Your jaw does that strange, sympathetic twinge where your body decides to rehearse pain it has only heard about. It is an evolutionary flaw. Honestly, someone mentions teeth, and suddenly you are aware of every molar like they are a group chat that just went quiet. You follow the rumor down a narrow lane where the buildings lean toward each other like they are gossiping. The smell here is different. Less herbs, more metal. Less soup, more iron filings and old smoke. A sign creaks overhead, hand-painted, its letters uneven. This is where you go when your mouth has betrayed you. Inside, the light is harsh and unforgiving, bouncing off tools laid out on a table. You recognize some of them immediately, and your spine reacts before your brain finishes the thought. Pliers, picks, a small hand drill that looks far too cheerful about its purpose. There is no reclining chair, just a sturdy seat and the understanding that you will not be leaving until something is gone. A man looks up, wipes his hands on an apron that has seen things, and smiles in a way meant to reassure. It does not work. He asks what brings you in, and you gesture vaguely at your face, because explaining dental pain across centuries feels unnecessary. He nods. He has heard it all before. Mainstream historical fact settles into the room like dust. Dentistry in 1700s, America is not a separate, refined profession. Tooth care is often handled by barber surgeons, physicians, or anyone with the right tools and nerve. Preventive dental care is minimal. Tooth decay is common. Sugar consumption is rising. Oral hygiene practices exist but are inconsistent. Pain is inevitable, and extraction is the most reliable solution. The practitioner peers into your mouth with the confidence of someone who believes they're about to find something deeply offensive hiding in there. He taps a tooth, and the jolt of pain shoots straight through your skull like a lightning bolt looking for meaning. "Ah," he says. "Worm." You blink. Tooth worm. It is said so casually that you almost miss the weight of it. The idea is old and widespread, that tooth decay and pain are caused by tiny worms burrowing into the tooth. You cannot see them, but you can feel their work. They gnaw, they squirm. They make themselves known at night when you're trying to sleep and failing. Quirky tidbit that refuses to leave your brain. Some people claim to have seen toothworms after applying certain treatments, like burning herbs near the tooth and then pointing to little fibrous bits as proof when pain lessens. Confirmation bias has been doing cardio for centuries. The logic is grimly simple. If something is living in your tooth, you must drive it out or kill it. That means heat, smoke, or force. The practitioner suggests a hot wire applied near the cavity to frighten the worm. Alternatively, he can drill into the tooth to reach it directly. Or, if you would prefer something definitive, he can remove the tooth entirely and end the infestation forever. You glance at the drill. It is hand-cranked. You imagine the sound. You imagine the vibration traveling through bone. Your soul quietly excuses itself. Joke number 1. Very subdued. Suddenly, floss feels like a miracle technology sent from the future by benevolent wizards. A man in the corner of the room is already seated, gripping the arms of the chair, His cheek is swollen, his eye watering. The practitioner nods to you like, "Watch and learn." You do not want to watch and learn. You want to watch and forget. The practitioner heats a wire in the fire until it glows dull red. The smell changes instantly. Sharp, acrid. The man's eyes go wide. There is no countdown, no gentle explanation, just a quick motion toward the mouth. The sound that follows is a short, animal cry that seems to come from somewhere deeper than the throat. The smell of burned organic matter fills the room, and you realize with a sick sort of awe that this is the smell of living tissue being cooked. The practitioner withdraws the wire, nods, and says something about the worm being discouraged. The man slumps, shaking, tears streaming down his face. Someone presses a cloth into his hands. The pain subsides slightly, or maybe it just changes shape. Relief and trauma share the space awkwardly. Historians still argue whether belief in tooth worms meaningfully shaped dental practices, or whether it was more of a narrative layered over treatments people were already doing out of desperation. Either way, the belief gives people something to fight. Pain without an enemy is harder to face than pain with a villain, even if that villain is imaginary and lives in your molar. The practitioner turns to the drill. You watch him demonstrate on a piece of wood, cranking the handle, the bit spinning with a low whine. He explains that drilling can relieve pressure and allow bad matter to escape. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it makes things worse. Sometimes it leads to infection so severe that extraction becomes inevitable anyway. The man in the chair shakes his head weakly. He has had enough. He wants the tooth gone. Extraction is fast. Relatively speaking, the forceps clamp down. There is a twist, a pull, a wet sound you will never forget. The man screams, then goes eerily quiet, like the volume has been turned down on the world. Blood fills his mouth. He spits into a bowl that has been waiting patiently, like it knew it would be needed. The practitioner holds up the tooth. Root intact, darkened and jagged. Proof of victory. Someone nods approvingly. Someone else looks away. Joke number 2. Barely audible. It is wild how often bowls show up right before something awful happens in this century. You notice something else as the man is helped to his feet. The practitioner rinses the forceps in water. That is it. No sterilization as you understand it. No concept of bacteria waiting for an invitation. The tools are ready for the next mouth, the next worm, the next scream. Outside, you breathe deeply, grateful for air that does not smell like burnt enamel and fear. You pass people clutching their jaws, cheeks swollen, eyes hollow from nights without sleep. Tooth pain here is not an inconvenience. It is a crisis. It can lead to infection that spreads, swelling that closes airways, fevers that turn deadly. A bad tooth can kill you. That fact alone explains why people submit to these horrors. Pain is one thing. The threat beneath it is another. You hear someone recommend a folk remedy as you walk. Clove oil, garlic, tobacco packed against the gum, ashes mixed with honey. Some of these have mild numbing or antiseptic effects. Some do nothing. Some make everything worse. But when you're desperate, you try whatever is within reach. In one house, a woman tells you she swore she felt the worm leave after holding smoke near her mouth. She insists she heard it crackle. You do not argue. Pain stories are not for debating, they are for surviving. Historians still argue whether early dental practices caused more harm than good overall, or whether they prevented worse outcomes in an era with few alternatives. Standing here, you can feel the answer shifting depending on which case you look at. The man who can sleep tonight without pain might call the practitioner a hero. The man whose extraction leads to infection and fever might call him a butcher. Both stories are true. As evening approaches, your jaw finally relaxes. Or maybe your body just gives up on anticipating pain. You realize that teeth, like so many things in this era, are treated only when they become unbearable. Preventive care is not a concept people can afford, mentally or materially. You endure until you cannot. Then you submit to whatever might end it. The street quiets. Someone laughs nearby, missing a tooth. Voice whistling through the gap. Life adapts. And as you turn toward home, you notice the sign of another shop glowing faintly in the dusk. Not a barber, not a midwife, not a dental horror house. An apothecary. Shelves, bottles, promises in liquid form. You can already sense the next layer of medicine waiting for you, tasting suspiciously like rum and regret. The apothecary smells like a mistake you haven't made yet. The moment you step inside, your nose is hit with sweetness, bitterness, alcohol, and something metallic hiding underneath like a secret. Shelves line the walls from floor to ceiling, packed with bottles that catch the light and bend it into amber, green, and murky brown. Labels are handwritten, sometimes neat, sometimes desperate. This place does not whisper danger. It hums it. The apothecary himself looks pleased to see you, the way shopkeepers do when customers arrive carrying visible uncertainty. He gestures broadly, proud of his collection. Roots hang from the ceiling. Powders sit in little drawers. Liquids rest in corked glass like sleeping animals. Every bottle promises relief. Some deliver it. Others deliver something else entirely. This is where medicine becomes a marketplace. Mainstream historical fact eases in. Colonial apothecaries supply much of the medicine in 1700s America, compounding remedies based on European pharmacopoeias, local plants, and whatever else seems promising. Apothecaries sell herbs, minerals, animal products, and chemical compounds. Regulation is minimal. Potency varies wildly. What you get depends on the seller, the source, and how generous fate feels that day. You watch a woman request something for her child's cough. The apothecary listens, nods gravely, and reaches for a bottle that smells faintly sweet. He pours a measured amount, adds a splash of something clear, and hands it over with instructions that sound careful but are mostly ritual. Take a spoon at night. Keep the child warm. Pray. You lean closer and catch the scent. Alcohol. Rum. Probably. Many medicines here are suspended in spirits. Alcohol preserves. Alcohol extracts plant compounds. Alcohol makes everything easier to swallow, including disappointment. It also sedates, which can look a lot like healing when the alternative is misery. Joke number 1, gently offered. If the medicine makes you feel better because you are slightly drunk, that still counts as relief in this century. You ask about fever. The apothecary's eyes light up. Fever is a great opportunity for dramatic solutions. He recommends calomel, a mercury-based compound widely used as a purgative. He explains that it will stimulate salivation, clear blockages, and set the system right. He does not mention mercury poisoning, not because he is hiding it maliciously, but because the concept does not fully exist yet in the way you understand it. Calomel is popular. Doctors prescribe it. Apothecaries sell it. Patients endure its effects. Excessive salivation, mouth sores, loose teeth. Sometimes people improve. Sometimes they deteriorate. The line between treatment and toxicity is thin, and no one has drawn it clearly yet. Quirky tidbit that feels like a prank, but is not. Mercury appears in multiple remedies, from purgatives to treatments for syphilis. The phrase, "a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury," will later emerge to describe the trade-off. Right now, it is just normal. You notice another jar labeled with something alarming: ground beetles. The apothecary explains they are used in certain preparations to stimulate the body. Animal parts are common here: snails, frogs, fat, bones. There is a belief that vitality can be transferred, that consuming or applying parts of living things can restore balance. The boundaries between medicine, magic, and metaphor blur. You ask about pain. The apothecary reaches for something darker, thicker: laudanum, an opium tincture dissolved in alcohol. It is powerful. It eases pain. It calms anxiety. It quiets coughing. It helps people sleep. It also hooks them, though addiction is not yet fully conceptualized. People talk about needing it, about feeling unwell without it. But the framework to understand dependency is still forming. He pours a small amount and warns you not to overdo it, which is the 1700s equivalent of a dosage label that says, "Good luck." Historians still argue whether widespread use of opium-based medicines was a compassionate response to suffering in a brutal era, or whether it created a silent epidemic of dependency that went largely unrecognized. Standing here, you can feel both truths breathing in the same space. Another customer asks for something to purify the blood. The apothecary smiles. Blood purification is a bestseller. He offers a blend of herbs, maybe sarsaparilla, maybe something else. The concept of toxins is vague, but compelling. People want to believe illness is something that can be flushed out, washed away, neutralized. You read a label that claims to restore vigor, strengthen nerves, and sharpen the mind. It contains dirt, or something close to it. Clay, perhaps, or powdered mineral. Earth as medicine. The logic is ancient. The body is made of earth. Earth can fix the body. Sometimes this provides trace minerals. Sometimes it provides parasites. It is a gamble with a geological accent. Joke number 2. Quietly. This is the first health store, and the return policy is death. You ask where the apothecary gets his knowledge. He gestures to books, to tradition, to what people have asked for over the years. He learns by selling and watching. If something seems to help, he keeps it. If it kills people quickly, he quietly stops offering it, unless demand stays high. Commerce and care intertwine. He is not a villain. He is a node in a system where evidence moves slowly and suffering moves fast. Behind the counter, you spot something that looks suspiciously like dirt scraped from a wall. The apothecary explains it is used for certain stomach ailments. It absorbs moisture. It binds. In small doses, it can calm diarrhea. In large doses, it can cause blockages. Dosage is everything. Precision is aspirational. You realize something unsettling. The apothecary does not always know which ingredient does what. Remedies are blends. If someone improves, which part worked? If someone worsens, which part failed? Without controlled experiments, cause and effect are foggy. Stories replace studies. Anecdotes become data. Historians still argue whether colonial apothecaries slowed the development of standardized medicine by perpetuating inconsistent remedies, or whether they preserved valuable plant knowledge that later science would refine. Again, both can be true. Progress is rarely polite. As evening falls, candles are lit, and the bottles glow like captured sunsets. You watch people leave with small packages, clutching hope in glass. Some will feel better, some will not. Some will die, convinced they did everything right. You step back into the street with the taste of herbs still ghosting your tongue. The town feels heavier now, like you have peeked behind the curtain and realized how much medicine here relies on faith. Faith in substances. Faith in authority. Faith that suffering has a solution if you can just find the right bottle. In the distance, a bell tolls. Someone has died. Someone always has. You think of calomel and laudanum, of mercury and rum, of dirt sold as cure, and you realize the next thing you're about to face is not a shop or a practitioner, but a pattern, a surge of sickness that overwhelms every remedy, every theory, every bottle on the shelf. Because when epidemics come, all this careful choosing collapses into panic. And panic has its own medicine. Panic does not announce itself politely. It leaks. It seeps under doors, crawls through cracks, and settles into the bones of a town before anyone agrees to name it. You feel it before you hear it. A tightening in conversations, a shortening of tempers, a sudden urgency in movements that used to be casual. The apothecary shelves empty faster than they can be refilled. Candles burn late into the night. People start counting coughs. By the time someone finally says the word plague, it feels less like news and more like confirmation. You walk through the streets and notice how quickly order phrase. A house that was loud with children yesterday is silent today. A neighbor who waved every morning no longer opens the door. Smoke rises from odd places as people burn herbs, vinegar, tar, anything they believe might cleanse the air. The smell is sharp and choking, but no one complains. If it stings your eyes, it must be doing something. This is what an epidemic looks like in 1700s America. Not a single disease, necessarily, but waves of sickness that arrive without explanation and refuse to respect boundaries. Yellow fever, typhus, dysentery, influenza, smallpox again and again. They blur together in memory, because the experience is the same. Sudden illness, rapid spread, limited understanding, and a rising sense that whatever you thought you knew about medicine is not enough. Mainstream historical fact anchors you. Epidemics regularly devastate colonial towns, especially port cities, where ships bring not only goods, but disease. Without germ theory, people attribute outbreaks to miasmas, bad air, rotting matter, weather changes, or moral decay. Quarantine exists, but it is unevenly enforced and poorly understood. Public health is an idea in its infancy, crying loudly and incoherently. You pass a notice nailed to a post, warning travelers away. The handwriting is shaky, like the person writing it did not sleep. In another street, a red mark has been painted on a door. Inside, the sick are kept, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. Families bring food to the threshold and leave it there like offerings to an invisible god. The sick rooms blur together. You step into one and the heat hits you immediately. Someone lies sweating, delirious, eyes glassy. The family has tried everything: bleeding, purging, cooling drinks, warming blankets, vinegar fumes, prayer. Nothing has stopped the fever from climbing like it has somewhere urgent to be. A physician arrives and does what physicians do. He examines. He nods. He prescribes. But his voice is quieter than before. Epidemics humble confidence. When treatment after treatment fails, even the most authoritative posture starts to sag. Historians still argue whether the aggressive treatments of epidemics, especially bleeding, worsened outcomes overall by weakening already ill patients, or whether they made little difference in diseases that were often fatal regardless. In this room, that debate feels academic. The person in the bed does not care about theory. They care about the pounding in their head and the way the world seems to tilt when they open their eyes. Outside, fear turns social. People start avoiding each other. Markets thin out. Churches debate whether to close, which feels like debating whether to breathe. Some ministers insist gathering is essential. Others quietly cancel services. Rumors fly faster than facts. Someone claims the disease came from a ship. Someone else claims it came from a bad batch of grain. Someone else insists it is punishment. You overhear arguments in the street. One man says the disease spreads through contact. Another insists it spreads through air. Another believes it targets those of weak constitution. Everyone is partially right and dangerously wrong at the same time. Quirky tidbit, darkly fascinating. People sometimes carry little sachets of herbs or sponges soaked in vinegar to hold near their faces, believing this will purify the air they breathe. Doctors wear them. Gravediggers wear them. It becomes a kind of talisman. You imagine future generations looking at masks with the same mix of sympathy and hindsight. The graveyard fills faster than usual. Funerals become brief. There is less time for ceremony when death is busy. Coffins are simple. Sometimes there are no coffins at all. The sound of shovels becomes part of the town's background noise, like insects at dusk. Joke number 1. Soft and tired. This is when people discover that out of sight, out of mind does not work on bacteria, even if they do not know the word bacteria yet. Doctors argue among themselves. Should patients be kept warm or cool? Should they be bled early or late? Should purging be aggressive or gentle? There is no consensus, only camps. Each camp has its successes and its failures, and each interprets outcomes through its own lens. If a patient survives, it proves the method. If they die, it proves the disease was severe. You see a family decide not to call a doctor at all. They have watched too many neighbors worsen after treatment. Instead, they nurse their sick quietly, offering comfort and food, keeping them hydrated as best they can. Sometimes those patients survive. When they do, people whisper that maybe doctors make things worse. Sometimes those patients die, and people whisper that they should have done more. There is no winning this game. Historians still argue whether therapeutic nihilism, the choice to do little, was accidentally beneficial in some epidemic contexts, simply because it avoided harmful interventions. But that idea only makes sense with hindsight. In the moment, doing nothing feels like abandonment. The town's leaders meet. They discuss closing roads. They discuss quarantining houses. They discuss ships waiting offshore, crews sick and desperate, waving flags that mean trouble. Trade slows. Food grows scarce. Fear feeds on itself. You notice how quickly social divisions sharpen. Outsiders are blamed. The poor are blamed. The sick are blamed. People search for patterns that make sense emotionally, even if they do not make sense biologically. It is easier to hate than to accept randomness. Joke number 2. Grim but honest when medicine runs out of answers. Sociology shows up uninvited. Inside another house, you find someone recovering. They are weak but alive. The family is cautiously joyful. Like people who have learned not to celebrate too loudly, they credit prayer. They credit a particular herb. They credit the decision not to bleed. Their story joins 100 others, each pointing in a different direction. As days stretch into weeks, exhaustion sets in. Panic burns hot at first, then smolders. People adjust. They learn which streets to avoid. They learn how to recognize early signs. They learn how to grieve quickly and keep moving. You realize epidemics do something subtle to medicine. They expose its limits. They force practitioners to confront uncertainty. They also push innovation, because desperation loosens old rules. Some doctors begin to question aggressive bleeding. Some begin to emphasize cleanliness, ventilation, isolation, even if they cannot fully explain why it helps. The seeds of change are planted in the rubble of failure. Historians still argue whether these incremental shifts toward sanitation and observation were driven more by empirical success or by the sheer embarrassment of repeated failure. Standing here, you suspect embarrassment deserves more credit than it usually gets. As the outbreak wanes, the town is altered. Empty houses, new orphans, survivors with lingering weakness. The apothecary restocks slowly. The barber-surgeon sharpens his tools. The midwife returns to quieter work. Life resumes, because it always does, but it doesn't reset. You walk through the streets one last time, listening to the echo of coughing that has finally faded. You think about how epidemics act like stress tests. They reveal what medicine is built on: theory, tradition, authority, fear, hope. All of it gets pushed to the breaking point. And in that breaking, something else becomes visible. You notice stained aprons hanging outside a building near the edge of town. Dark, crusted, unmistakable. They are not being washed. They are being displayed. Experience, in this place, is worn on the body, and the bloodier you look, the more people trust you. The next place you are pulled toward is not quiet, not gentle, and not theoretical. It is where medicine meets muscle and speed and steel. The surgeon's domain. The aprons catch your eye first. They hang stiffly in the open air, dark with old stains that no amount of scrubbing seems to have fully erased. They sway slightly in the breeze, like flags marking territory. In this place, cleanliness is not the point. Proof is, you step inside, and the smell changes immediately. Iron, sweat, something sharp that clings to the back of your throat. This is not the apothecary's world of glass and promises. This is where flesh meets force. Welcome to the surgeon's space. A man stands at a table, sleeves rolled high, hands broad and steady. His apron is the darkest of them all. That is not an accident. In the 1700s, a blood-stained apron is not a failure. It is a résumé. It says, "I have cut before. I have survived it. So have some of my patients." Mainstream historical fact settles in heavily. Surgeons in colonial America are distinct from physicians. Physicians diagnose and prescribe. Surgeons cut. Their work is practical, physical, and often learned through apprenticeship or military service. Surgery is dangerous, painful, and performed without anesthesia or antisepsis. Speed is a virtue. Hesitation can kill. You notice the tools laid out with careful order. Saws, knives, hooks, forceps. They are not decorative. They are bluntly honest. Every instrument here has one job, and that job involves opening the body. A man is brought in, supported by two others. His leg is wrapped in cloth darkened by blood and pus. He moans softly, the sound of someone who has passed pain and is now drifting in it. An infection has set in. The leg is swollen, hot, angry. Red streaks crawl upward like warning signs. The surgeon examines it quickly. No long theories. No talk of humors. This is about survival math. If the infection spreads, the man will die. If the leg goes, the man might live. Amputation, the word is not dramatic here. It is functional. You watch the surgeon make the decision in seconds. There is no committee, no consent form. The patient nods weakly. He knows. Everyone knows. They sit him down. Someone hands him a piece of leather to bite. Someone else pours a drink down his throat. Alcohol again, stepping in where anesthesia has not yet been invented. It dulls the edges but does not erase them. Joke number 1, whispered like a confession. This is where the phrase, "bite the bullet," stops feeling metaphorical and starts feeling like a lifestyle choice. The surgeon positions himself. He marks the limb, He checks the tourniquet. He does not look nervous. Nerves waste time. Time costs blood. The first cut is fast and deep. The patient screams, and the sound is immediate and raw. The kind that makes your stomach lurch because it does not pass through language first. It goes straight from body to air. The surgeon works quickly, slicing through muscle, tying off vessels, sawing bone with brutal efficiency. The saw's rasping sound is something you will carry with you longer than you want. Blood flows. Assistants wipe. The apron darkens further. And then it is over. The limb is gone. The stump is wrapped. The patient slumps, pale, trembling, alive. There is no applause. Just relief that the worst is past. For now. Historians still argue whether early surgeons were reckless brutes or skilled technicians constrained by the limits of their era. Watching this, you realize the answer depends on whether you are standing at the table or lying on it. The surgeon's speed and decisiveness can be the difference between life and death. It can also be the difference between controlled trauma and catastrophic shock. In another corner of the room, a man lies with a head wound. The surgeon probes gently, checking for skull fracture. Trepanning, drilling a hole in the skull to relieve pressure, is known and sometimes used. The idea is ancient. The risks are enormous. The alternatives are often worse. The surgeon decides against it this time. The man groans as the wound is cleaned and bandaged. Cleaned in this era means wiped, maybe rinsed. No one knows about microbes. They know about dirt. They know about smell. They know that rot is bad. But the invisible killers go unchallenged. Quirky tidbit that makes your scalp itch. Surgeons sometimes reuse dressings and sponges, believing they hold healing properties or simply because supplies are limited. Those same materials can spread infection. Knowledge lags behind necessity. You notice the way people watch the surgeon, with awe, with fear, with gratitude. This is a man who can remove what is killing you. He can also remove what makes you whole. His power is tangible. Outside, you hear people talk about him with reverence. He saved my brother. He cut so fast. He has a steady hand. Blood stains are mentioned like medals. And yet, mortality after surgery is high. Many patients die from infection days later. Others succumb to shock. Some survive and live long lives with missing limbs, adapting in a world that offers little accommodation. There are no prosthetics as you imagine them. There is resilience and improvisation. Historians still argue whether battlefield surgery during conflicts like the Revolutionary War advanced surgical techniques faster than peacetime practice. The urgency of war forces innovation. Surgeons learn to amputate faster, to manage wounds more decisively. But they also work in horrific conditions, surrounded by flies, filth, and the endless press of bodies. You step outside to breathe, because your chest feels tight and your hands are clenched without your permission. The air feels cleaner even though you know it is not. You lean against a wall and listen to your own heartbeat slow. Inside, the surgeon washes his hands in a basin. Water, maybe soap. That is it. No gloves. No concept of sterilization beyond what looks clean. He dries his hands on the same apron. The cycle continues. You think back to the apothecary, the midwife, the barber, the physician. They all operate with different tools and different theories. But they are connected by one thing. They are all trying to act in the face of suffering. Surgery is just the most visible expression of that impulse. When in doubt, cut. Joke number 2. Tired but true. This is why you flinch when someone in a movie says, "We have to do something." As the day fades, you hear news of soldiers arriving with wounds. The surgeon prepares again. His world does not slow down. Pain does not keep office hours. You walk away, feeling the weight of what you have seen settle into your shoulders. Medicine here is not gentle. It is reactive. It is heroic and horrifying in equal measure. And yet, even in this blood-soaked room, you notice something else beginning to stir. Questions. Doubt. Why do some patients survive while others die after the same procedure? Why do some wounds fester and others heal? Why does cleanliness seem to matter, even if no one can explain it? These questions do not have answers yet, but they are being asked. And while surgeons cut and saw, other practitioners are experimenting with less obvious interventions, ones that do not involve blades, but pressure, heat, cold, drawing things out without opening the body. You hear someone mention cupping, and against your better judgment, you follow. Cupping sounds harmless when you hear the word. It sounds like tea. It sounds like a gentle, supportive activity. You imagine a warm mug and a blanket and the sweet lie that your body is not a fragile bag of fluids. Then you step into the room where it actually happens, and your optimism quietly crawls under a chair. The patient is sitting with their shirt pulled down around their waist, back exposed to the air. Their skin is pale in the candlelight, goosebumped from chill and anticipation. A practitioner stands behind them, holding a small glass cup and a taper. The cup looks innocent, like something you might drink from if you were feeling fancy. The taper does not. Mainstream historical fact slides in. Hot cupping is widely used in early modern medicine, including in 1700s America, as a way to draw blood and fluids toward the surface, relieve congestion, and balance humors. Practitioners create suction by briefly heating the air inside a cup and placing it on the skin. The cooling air contracts, pulling the skin upward into the cup. The practitioner lights the taper, slips it into the cup for a moment, and quickly presses the cup onto the patient's back. The flame goes out. The cup sticks. The skin rises into it like it's being gently kidnapped. You hear the soft gasp of the patient. Not exactly pain, more like surprise at the sensation of being vacuumed by your own century's glassware. The practitioner places another cup, and another. Soon, the patient's back looks like it has been dotted with clear domes, each one tugging at flesh with quiet insistence. You watch as the skin inside the cups turns pink, then darker, like a bruise forming in real time. The practitioner nods as if this is excellent news. Drawing it out, he murmurs. Drawing what out? Exactly, is the kind of question that would get you side-eyed for being too modern. In their worldview, sickness can stagnate, bad humors can pool, blood can congest, pain can be trapped. The idea is that suction pulls these problems toward the surface, where the body can release them, or where they become less threatening to vital organs. Sometimes they also use wet cupping, which involves making small cuts before applying the cup so blood is drawn out more directly. That is basically bloodletting with extra steps and a glass hat. Quirky tidbit, the kind you will remember while staring at your own unbruised back later. Early cupping is sometimes done with horn cups, not glass. Yes, literal animal horn, hollowed and used as a suction device. The practitioner might create suction by mouth, which is exactly as unsettling as it sounds. And yes, it means two people share a moment of intimacy that neither asked for. Historians still argue whether cupping's persistence across centuries is mostly due to cultural tradition and the placebo effect, or whether some people experience genuine relief from increased blood flow and muscle relaxation. You can feel the debate happening inside your own nervous system as you watch the patient's shoulders loosen slightly. Is it the treatment, the heat, the focused attention, the stillness, or is it simply the body enjoying any ritual that doesn't involve sawing? Joke number 1. Softly. Compared to the amputation room, this almost counts as self-care. When the cups are removed, the back is marked with dark circles, like a constellation of bruises. The practitioner seems pleased. The patient looks both relieved and slightly betrayed by their own skin. After cupping comes another category of treatment that feels like it was invented by someone who thought discomfort equals effectiveness. Cold comforts. You step outside into winter air and find a small group at a river edge. Someone is being guided into the water. They are not swimming for fun. They are being treated. Cold plunges are used for various ailments, especially those associated with the mind, nerves, or feverish agitation. The idea is shock and reset. Calm the system. Reduce heat. Strengthen the constitution. The patient steps in, gasps, and clutches the helper's arm. Their breath comes out in white bursts, and their lips start turning the faint shade of, "Please do not do this again." The helpers speak gently, encouraging endurance. A few moments later, they pull the patient out, wrap them in blankets, and rub their limbs briskly. This rubbing is part of the ritual. Stimulate circulation, bring warmth back. Make the body feel like it has worked. The patient trembles, but their eyes look clearer, or maybe they just look grateful to be alive. Historians still argue whether such shock treatments were ever beneficial in cases of delirium or agitation, or whether they mainly served as a crude method of restraint and control. Again, both can be true. In a time with limited tools for mental health, cold water becomes both medicine and discipline. You notice how often medicine here overlaps with moral instruction. If you are ill, you are encouraged to be temperate. If you are anxious, you are encouraged to be calm. If you are melancholic, you are encouraged to be grateful. Treatment are not only about the body, they are about shaping behavior, reinforcing the idea that health is partly a matter of character. Joke number 2, with sleepy sarcasm, turns out, "Have you tried not being sick?" is not a modern invention. It is vintage, back in town. You see another version of comfort that is anything but. Blistering. A practitioner applies a plaster made with irritants to raise a blister on the skin, believing it draws inflammation away from deeper organs. The blister forms slowly, a painful bubble, and the patient grits their teeth. Counter-irritation is the principle. Hurt the body somewhere else to redirect suffering. It is like distracting a barking dog by setting off fireworks. Quirky tidbit. Mustard plasters and other irritant rubs are popular not only among professionals, but among families. These are home remedies. People keep the ingredients in the kitchen. In other words, your pantry can become a clinic at any moment, which is convenient and horrifying. You start to see the pattern more clearly now. Many treatments in this era aim to move things, move blood, move fluids, move heat, move pain, draw it out, push it down, sweat it out, purge it out. The body is treated like a landscape with bad weather, and the healer is trying to redirect storms. And then, inevitably, you run into the people who take that logic and sell it with extra sparkle. Because while cupping and cold plunges at least feel rooted in tradition, there is another kind of medicine creeping in, wearing a better coat and speaking with smoother words, a kind that thrives on uncertainty and performance. The quacks with credentials. You hear about a lecture, a demonstration, a man trained abroad who can astonish a crowd. The town buzzes. People want hope, and hope is a market. So you follow the crowd toward a hall where a polished voice is about to promise the impossible. The hall is packed in the way only desperate curiosity can pack a room. People squeeze shoulder to shoulder, coats brushing, breath clouding faintly in the cold air that seeps through cracks in the walls. Someone has brought a lantern and set it near the front, turning the space into a small stage. The mood is half carnival, half church service, because that is what medicine becomes when it cannot reliably heal. Entertainment with a prayer tucked inside. A man steps forward, and the crowd quiets immediately. He is well dressed. His hair is neat. His accent carries the faint polish of somewhere across the ocean, which, in this setting, is basically an aura. He introduces himself as trained in London, perhaps Edinburgh, perhaps somewhere that sounds expensive. The crowd murmurs approval. The word trained lands like a warm hand on a frightened heart. Mainstream historical fact, offered plainly. In 1700s America, you find a spectrum of practitioners, from genuinely trained physicians to self-proclaimed experts. Some have European education and bring the prestige of established institutions. Others borrow that prestige through dress, language, and performance. Credentials exist, but they are hard to verify. And reputation often matters more than documentation. The man smiles and begins a lecture that is half anatomy lesson, half sales pitch. He speaks of nerves, circulation, vitality. He names parts of the body like he is showing off rare coins. People lean in. Hearing someone speak confidently about the body is soothing, because it implies the body is knowable. He then gestures to a table where objects sit under cloth. The cloth is pulled back with a flourish. Bottles, instruments, a syringe-like device that makes you instinctively cross your legs, even if the device isn't for that. A small bellows and a pipe. He announces he will demonstrate a treatment that can revive the faint, stimulate the sluggish, and restore life to those near the brink. It involves tobacco smoke. Yes, tobacco smoke. You watch as a volunteer is brought forward, a man who looks pale and shaky, perhaps genuinely unwell, perhaps paid in ale. The lecturer explains that tobacco is stimulating, warming, invigorating. It wakes the system. It moves the humors. It shocks the body into renewed motion. Then comes the part where your modern brain starts screaming. The smoke is administered via the rectum, tobacco smoke enema. A real thing that exists in early modern medicine, used for resuscitation and other ailments based on the belief that smoke, warmth, and stimulation delivered internally can revive the body. It is one of those facts you learn and then have to sit quietly for a moment, because it is too absurd to process quickly. Joke number 1, whispered with deep exhaustion. You came here for health care and got a surprise chimney installation. The crowd watches with tense fascination as the device is prepared. The lecturer stays smooth, explaining the rationale as if it is the most reasonable thing anyone has ever done. In a world where drowning victims sometimes appear dead but might still be revived, any method that seems to jolt life back into the body becomes attractive. Tobacco is known to be stimulating. Smoke is warm. The rectum is accessible. The logic, as logic goes here, is not random. It is just profoundly cursed. The volunteer endures the demonstration with a face that cycles through resignation, discomfort, and a distant stare that says he is reconsidering every decision that led him here. The lecturer announces improvements. The crowd murmurs. Some are impressed. Some look horrified but unwilling to admit it. A few laugh nervously, which is what humans do when confronted with something too weird for their brains to categorize. Historians still argue whether such dramatic interventions persisted because they had occasional observable effects, or because spectacle itself created belief, and belief created reports of improvement. When a crowd wants to see a miracle, they often find one. The lecturer moves on to other treatments. He speaks of electrical stimulation, of tonics that strengthen the nerves, of powders that cleanse the blood. He gestures with confidence. He tells stories of patients cured. He sprinkles his speech with Latin terms like salt on stew. The crowd nods as if they understand. Because understanding is not required, participation is. You notice something important. He is not necessarily a pure fraud. He might genuinely believe in his methods. Many quacks are sincere. They are wrong with confidence, which is somehow more dangerous than being wrong quietly. And some methods do have effects. Tobacco can stimulate, opium can soothe, alcohol can calm, a shock can revive someone who is not truly dead. The problem is that these effects are inconsistent, and the claims stretch far beyond reality. Outside the hall, you hear people arguing. One insists the lecturer is brilliant. Another calls him a charlatan. A third shrugs and says, "At least he tries." That last line hits you like a stone. In a world without reliable cures, trying becomes its own form of authority. Quirky tidbit. Traveling doctors and showmen sometimes follow fairs and markets, selling remedies with dramatic demonstrations, music, and storytelling. The line between medicine and theater is thin. If you can draw a crowd, you can sell a cure. If you can tell a good story, you can become a healer. You walk with a man who has bought a bottle of something labeled elixir of life. He holds it like treasure. He tells you it will cure his wife's weakness. He says the lecturer promised. You look at the bottle. The liquid is dark. The label is vague. The price was high. Hope is expensive. Historians still argue whether the rise of these credential-flavored quacks in colonial America was driven more by public gullibility or by genuine gaps in access to trained medical care. Watching the man clutch the bottle, you cannot call him gullible. You can only call him desperate. That desperation is fertile ground for anyone who can speak smoothly and offer certainty. As the evening cools, you pass the apothecary again and notice how his shop and the lecturer's stage share the same fuel, the hunger for a remedy that feels decisive. The apothecary's bottles at least come with tradition. The lecturer's bottles come with charisma. Both can contain the same substances anyway. You hear someone mention patent medicine, a phrase that hints at officialness, at protection, at legitimacy. It suggests that a remedy has been approved, vetted, stamped by authority. In reality, it often means the opposite, that it is marketed hard and explained vaguely. And you can feel the next layer forming, the one where medicine becomes branding, where labels become louder than ingredients, where the cure is not just in the bottle, but in the story you tell about the bottle. You think back to the tobacco smoke demonstration and shudder. But you also realize something else. Even the most ridiculous treatments are attempts to solve real problems. Drowning, shock, collapse, pain, fear. The body is fragile. The desire to control it is endless. The hall empties. People file out, clutching purchases. Some laugh. Some look hopeful. Some look haunted. You stand under the night sky and breathe in cold air that feels mercifully clean. The town lights flicker. Somewhere, a dog barks again and then gives up, as if it has also seen enough. And as you turn away, you see a cart rolling slowly down the street. It is loaded with boxes, bottles, and posters, bright promises, bold lettering, exaggerated claims. The driver calls out cures for every ailment in the human catalogue, patent medicines, poison elixirs. The next chapter of your discomfort is about to be swallowed by a spoonful of miracle. The cart is the loudest thing on the street, even when it barely makes a sound. It doesn't need to. The posters do the shouting for it. Bright ink, big words, extravagant promises that spill across paper like someone tried to bottle confidence and it exploded. The driver calls out as he rolls, cures for weakness, coughs, ague, female complaints, melancholy, worms, fevers, and that mysterious category known as general debility, which is basically 1700s for I feel bad and I don't know why. People gather the way they do around a fire. Hope is warm. A man hops down from the cart, smooth as oiled wood, and begins his pitch. He holds up a bottle and tilts it so the liquid catches the lamplight. Proven, he says. Trusted. Used by gentlemen. He says the words patent and London and doctor with the same reverence some people reserve for scripture, mainstream historical fact, slipped neatly into the sales patter. Patent medicines become common in the 1700s, often imported from Britain or modeled after British products. Despite the name, many are not truly patented in the modern sense of regulated, tested medicine. They are branded remedies sold widely with dramatic claims and secret ingredients. Marketing is the active ingredient. You watch a woman step forward with her child, asking about a cough that won't stop. The salesman smiles kindly, like a man who has practiced kindness the way other people practice card tricks. He recommends a syrup, sweet, soothing, calming. He says it will settle the lungs. She hands over coins with trembling fingers. You want to grab the bottle and read the label for ingredients, but labels here are mostly vibes. If ingredients are listed, they are often vague or incomplete. Proprietary secrets, a special blend, a unique preparation. And in this era, secrecy is framed as sophistication, not suspicion. The salesman offers another remedy for nervous disorders, which translates to anxiety, insomnia, trembling, and anything else that makes you inconveniently human. He promises calm. He promises sleep. He promises relief. And you know what likely sits inside those bottles, because you've seen the apothecary shelf. Alcohol, opium, sometimes both, sometimes strong herbs, sometimes heavy metals, sometimes turpentine or other harsh substances that make the body react dramatically, which can be mistaken for effectiveness. Quirky tidbit. Unsettling, but real. Some popular remedies in this broader, early modern tradition contain ingredients like antimony, mercury compounds, or other potent substances that can cause sweating, vomiting, or diarrhea. In a worldview that equates expelling with healing, a medicine that makes you violently purge can look like it's doing its job. Your body is suffering, but suffering is interpreted as progress. Joke number 1. Gentle and sleepy. In this market, side effects are basically a customer review. You drift closer to a small cluster of men debating which bottle is best. One insists a certain elixir cured his gout. Another says a different one saved him from stoppage, which is both a medical and emotional condition in this century. A third shrugs and says he drinks whatever makes him feel warm inside, which is the most honest medical strategy anyone has voiced all day. The salesman turns his pitch toward bigger claims. He points to an elderly man in the crowd and promises renewed vigor. He gestures to a young woman and promises rosy cheeks. He speaks of purifying the blood, strengthening the constitution, restoring the vital spirits. The language is broad because the product is broad. If you claim to cure everything, you don't have to specialize in truth. Historians still argue whether patent medicines flourished mainly because people were easily misled, or because these products filled a real need in a world where professional medical care was scarce, expensive, and often brutal. Standing here, you can see how the salesman thrives in the gap between suffering and options. Even a questionable bottle looks appealing when the alternative is bleeding, purging, or having your tooth removed with pliers. You watch a man buy a bottle for his wife's female troubles. He looks embarrassed, which tells you he does not fully understand what he's buying. but he wants to do something. The salesman nods sympathetically and slips the bottle into his hands like a secret. It is intimate. It is transactional. It is a tiny ritual of hope. Then, behind the cart, you catch sight of something more alarming, a crate marked with a symbol that suggests poison. The salesman keeps it out of the main view. You ask about it in an innocent tone. He smiles again, but his eyes narrow just slightly. "Strong medicine," he says, "not for the timid." That sentence should come with a warning label the size of a bedsheet. Some medicines are meant to shock the body. Blistering plasters, harsh purgatives, intense stimulants. The theory that a powerful jolt can knock illness loose, like rattling a stuck drawer until it opens. The problem is that sometimes the drawer is your organs. Joke number 2, whispered. They really looked at the human body and thought, "Have we tried violence?" You watch him sell a small vial to a man with a skin complaint. The salesman claims it will clear the rash. The vial likely contains something caustic, maybe even mercury-based, because mercury is everywhere in this era's medical toolkit. It can suppress symptoms temporarily. It can also poison, but the short-term change can be seductive. If the rash fades, the medicine gets credit. If the patient sickens, the rash gets blamed. The crowd thins as people spend what they can. You notice who buys most eagerly: the poor, the frightened, the chronically unwell, those who cannot afford repeated visits from physicians, those who fear surgery, those who have already tried everything else. The cart offers a shortcut, a private solution you can take at home without being judged, bled, or scolded. There is also a social element. Buying a branded medicine can feel modern. It can feel like participating in progress. A bottle with a fancy name suggests science, even if the contents are mostly booze and wishful thinking. Historians still argue whether these remedies slowed medical progress by distracting people from more evidence-based approaches, or whether they actually pushed society toward standardized products and broader distribution networks that later made real pharmaceuticals possible. It's one of those cruel ironies. Even nonsense can lay rails for future truth. As night deepens, the cart rolls away, leaving behind scraps of paper and the lingering aftertaste of promises. You walk past houses where people will sip their new medicines by candlelight, listening for signs of improvement. Some will sleep, finally, because opium or alcohol has wrapped their nerves in cotton. Some will vomit, some will purge, some will feel nothing and assume they need a higher dose. It's a dangerous logic loop, especially when dosage is guesswork and the bottle is not honest. You stop near a window and see a family at table. The father measures out a spoonful. The mother watches. The child grimaces. They swallow. They wait. The room is quiet except for the tiny sounds of breathing and hope. You realize that in this century, medicine is often a ritual of waiting. You do something. You endure the consequences. You watch. You interpret. You repeat. And when it fails, you try another thing. The body becomes a battleground of experiments. A bell tolls again in the distance. Another death. The town's rhythm continues. Commerce, sickness, prayer, burial. And then you hear a phrase that makes you pause because it sounds almost domestic, almost casual. A little bleeding now and then keeps you well. Preventive bleeding, a morning ritual, a household habit like brushing teeth. Except, with a lancet, you turn toward that idea with a sinking feeling. Because it means the next step is not just treating illness. It is chasing health by spilling it. You hear it again, said lightly. Like advice about keeping your boots dry. A little bleeding now and then keeps you well. It's offered with the same casual confidence people use when recommending a tea that always works. Except this tea is your blood. You follow the phrase into a tidy home where the air smells of soap, wood smoke, and that faint, sour note of old wool. This is not a desperate sick room. This is not a fever house. This is a family that believes they're doing maintenance, like oiling a hinge, like sharpening a blade, like airing out linens. The body, in their view, needs routine draining to stay balanced. On the table sits a small leather case. It is opened with the reverence of a prayer book. Inside, neatly arranged, is a lancet and a few cloths. The father of the house handles the tool with familiarity, the way you might handle a razor. He is not frightened. He is proud. Mainstream historical fact slides in. Bloodletting in the 1700s is not only used as treatment for acute illness, but sometimes as a preventive measure, based on the belief that removing blood can reduce inflammation, balance humors, and prevent disease. Seasonal bleeding is practiced in some communities, tied to old European traditions and theories about how the body changes with weather. The family gathers in a calm, almost ceremonial way. It's morning. The light is soft. The children are half awake. The mother has set out a bowl. Of course she has. The bowl is always waiting in this century. Joke number 1. Tired and affectionate. At this point, you're convinced the real national symbol of 1700s medicine is not an eagle. It's a bowl. The father wraps a strip of cloth around his arm to raise a vein. He looks down with satisfaction, as if the vein is a well-marked trail. He makes a small cut. Blood beads. Then flows. He catches it carefully, watching the color like it's a mood ring for the soul. He talks as if teaching. This keeps the body from becoming too full. It prevents fevers. It calms headaches. It keeps the spirit steady. The mother nods, used to this. One of the children watches with wide eyes, half fascinated, half horrified. You want to ask if anyone has ever fainted. But then you watch the father's face, pale slightly, and you get your answer without words. He is not fainting yet, but he is drifting in that direction, and the family treats it like a sign that the bleeding is working. Weakness becomes proof. Historians still argue whether preventive bloodletting persisted mainly because it was a deeply embedded cultural ritual, or because it sometimes coincided with natural recovery cycles and thus gained a reputation for effectiveness. Watching this family, you suspect ritual matters more than anyone wants to admit. Ritual feels like control. Ritual gives you something to do with fear. The father stops the flow, ties off the cloth, and presses a rag to the cut. He drinks a sip of something warm. The family moves on, breakfast continuing as if nothing strange has happened. You sit there feeling like you just watched someone change their own oil by pouring it on the floor. Then it's the mother's turn. She rolls up her sleeve and offers her arm without drama. The father cuts carefully. Blood flows. She looks away and focuses on her breathing. It is not pleasant, but she endures it with the stoic patience people in this era seem to have. The kind of patience built from living without modern comforts. The children, you discover, are bled too sometimes, though often less. There's debate even within households about how much is safe. Some people believe children should be bled gently to keep their constitutions clean. Others avoid it unless illness demands it. The logic shifts from family to family, but the underlying belief remains. Blood can be too much, too hot, too corrupt. Quirky tidbit, domestic and oddly tender. Some families time their bleeding around the seasons, believing spring is the best moment to thin the blood after winter heaviness. It is like a grim version of spring cleaning, except you are cleaning yourself from the inside with a blade. Joke number 2. Soft. Nothing says fresh start like hemorrhaging a little. You notice the way the father speaks about the body as if it were a barrel. If it gets too full, it spoils. If it gets too stagnant, it becomes dangerous. Bleeding is a release valve. If you live in a world where bad air and bad humors are constant threats, the idea of venting the system makes emotional sense, but you also see the cost. The mother's hands tremble slightly as she pours porridge. The father's face is pale. The children are subdued. A little blood loss is not necessarily catastrophic, but repeated routine bleeding can weaken people, especially if nutrition is limited or if other illnesses are lurking. What they call prevention can become vulnerability. A neighbor stops by and mentions that her husband bleeds himself weekly. The father laughs approvingly. "A disciplined man," he says, as if self-draining is evidence of moral strength. Medicine and virtue keep tangling together. Historians still argue whether the moral framing of bodily discipline in this era made harmful medical practices harder to challenge. If bleeding is not just treatment, but virtue, then refusing it becomes not only medical disagreement, but character flaw. That is a powerful social pressure. After breakfast, you walk with the father to the yard. He shows you a small set of leeches kept in a jar in the cool shade. Like pets nobody loves. He says leeches are gentler than the lancet, and sometimes he uses them for headaches or swelling. He speaks of them with the affection of someone who thinks nature provides solutions, even when those solutions are slimy and hungry. In the afternoon, you meet another family that practices preventive purging instead of bleeding. They take bitters, strong laxatives, or emetics at certain times of year to cleanse the body. The goal is the same: remove excess, keep balance, prevent disease. The methods differ. The discomfort is consistent. You begin to realize something about 1700s medicine. Health is not assumed. It is guarded. It is maintained through constant vigilance and constant interference. People do not trust their bodies to regulate themselves. They believe the body must be managed, disciplined, corrected, emptied. And then you hear about someone who is not sick in the fevered sense, but who is suffering deeply in a way the town does not know how to name cleanly. A person who cannot sleep, who cries without reason, who fears shadows, who sits staring for hours. The family whispers that their mind has gone strange, and they are not sure whether it is a spiritual matter, a moral failure, or an illness. You feel the air change as you step toward that house. Because when the ailment is the mind, the cures in this era often become even more physical, even more controlling, even more cruelly confident. You're about to meet melancholy, mania, and madness as 1700s America understands them. And the treatments will make cold water feel like kindness. The house is quieter than the others. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the strained kind, like everyone inside is holding their breath at the same time. You approach the door and hear a faint sound from within, a repetitive tapping, maybe fingers against wood, maybe a foot against the floor. Maybe a mind trying to convince itself it still has rhythm. A woman opens the door just enough to see your face, then widens it when she recognizes you as not a threat, which in this context means you are not carrying a blade or a sermon. Her eyes are tired. She whispers that her brother has not been himself, that he paces all night, that he stares at the wall, that he speaks to people who are not there, that sometimes he weeps as if something heavy is sitting on his chest. She says the word the way people say storm after seeing dark clouds, melancholy, or maybe madness, depending on who is talking and how afraid they are. You step inside, and the air is cool and stale. The furniture has been moved slightly, creating more space, fewer sharp corners. Small adjustments that suggest someone has learned to anticipate sudden movements, sudden collapses, sudden moments when the body acts before the mind can explain itself. In the corner sits the man. He is thin, his hair uncombed, his hands restless. His eyes lift toward you, but they do not quite land. He looks like someone listening to a distant conversation that never ends. When he speaks, his words come slow, heavy, like they have to travel through mud. Mainstream historical fact settles like a weight. In 1700s America, mental illness is poorly understood and often interpreted through a mix of medical theory, religious belief, and moral judgment. Conditions we might now label depression, anxiety, psychosis, or bipolar disorder are described with terms like melancholy, mania, lunacy, or fits. Treatments range from supportive care to harsh physical interventions and confinement. A local practitioner arrives, not always a physician, sometimes a minister, sometimes both roles in one man. He checks the man's pulse, looks at his tongue, and asks questions that circle the symptoms without truly touching them. Then he begins explaining, in the familiar language of humors and balance, that the man's system is disturbed. Too much black bile, too much heat in the brain, too much nervous agitation, too much imagination, too much of something. The family nods, relieved to have a framework, even if the framework is thin as paper. The practitioner prescribes a physical solution for a mental problem, because that is what the era has. He suggests purging to clear black bile. He suggests bleeding to reduce cerebral excitement. He suggests blistering to draw harmful humors away from the head. He suggests cold baths to shock the system into calm, and you realize, with a slow dread, that the body is about to be punished for the mind's suffering. They guide the man toward a tub. He resists weakly, not violent, just frightened. The family speaks softly, coaxing. The practitioner insists this is for his good. They lower him in. Cold water wraps around him like a slap. His breath catches. His shoulders tense. He gasps and tries to rise, but hands press him down gently but firmly. The point is not comfort. The point is control. The point is forcing the body into submission so the mind will follow. Historians still argue whether these shock treatments were sometimes intended compassionately as calming measures, or whether they were primarily forms of restraint dressed up as medicine. Watching the man's eyes widen into panic, you suspect the line between compassion and control is razor thin, and it cuts both ways. After the bath, he is wrapped in blankets, shivering violently. The practitioner nods, satisfied as if tremors are proof of progress. He says the cold has checked the overactive spirits. He recommends repeat sessions. The family looks uncertain but obedient. Obedience is easier than admitting there is no clear path. Then comes the moral layer. The minister side of the practitioner suggests prayer, confession, a return to proper habits. He hints that indulgence or idleness might have weakened the mind. The family absorbs this like guilt into cloth. In this era, sickness is rarely just sickness. It is also a story about who you are. Joke number 1. Low and weary. The 1700s really looked at sadness and said, "Have you tried shame?" The man is sometimes confined, not in a modern hospital, but in a room at home. The door is unlocked at night. Sometimes he is restrained with cords or straps if he becomes agitated, not because the family is cruel, but because they are terrified. There are few safe places to put someone whose mind is unraveling. There is no crisis line to call. There is no understanding of therapy. There is only family, fear, and whatever the local authority suggests. Quirky tidbit. Unsettling. Some communities believe mental disturbance can be influenced by lunar cycles, hence lunacy. People watch the moon with suspicion, as if the sky itself is meddling with brains. It becomes one more external force to blame, one more reason to feel powerless. You sit near the man later. When the room is calm, he speaks quietly, telling you he feels like his thoughts are heavy stones in his head. He says he cannot stop remembering things. He says sleep is far away. He says he feels watched. The words are familiar in their emotion, even if the era's labels are different. Pain is timeless. The family tries different remedies, a tea to calm nerves, laudanum to induce sleep, sometimes alcohol, because, of course, he sleeps briefly, then wakes groggy, mind still troubled. The cycle continues. Historians still argue whether early modern reliance on sedatives and physical reset methods masked mental illness rather than treating it, or whether these were the only available tools that provided any relief at all. Again, both truths can exist. A sedative can give someone a night of sleep, and that night can be life-saving. It can also become a trap, a dependency, a way to silence symptoms without understanding them. Joke number 2. Softly. It's like trying to fix a broken clock by covering it with a blanket and insisting the ticking is rude. You notice something else. The community's reaction. Neighbors whisper. Some offer help. Some avoid the house. Some suggest the man is possessed. Some suggest he is weak. The family becomes isolated, not just by the illness, but by the social discomfort around it. In another town, you hear of people being sent away to early institutions or poor houses, places that are not designed for healing but for containment. The goal is to remove the disturbance from public view. Out of sight becomes a kind of therapy for everyone else. When you leave the house, the air outside feels too bright. The birds sound too normal. You think about how medicine in this era treats the mind like an unruly limb. It must be restrained, shocked, drained, subdued. The body becomes the lever used to force the mind into order. And then you hear drums in the distance. Not music, not celebration, military rhythm. The town is talking about war, or at least about the possibility of it. Men drilling, weapons being cleaned, tension building like pressure in a storm cloud. You realize that soon, medicine will be dragged into a different environment entirely. One where injuries are loud and sudden and plentiful, and where the word sawbones becomes common. You have seen the surgeon's room. Now you are going to see the surgeon's battlefield. And bite the bullet is about to become something people actually do, because there is no other option. The drums are steady, almost hypnotic, a heartbeat you didn't ask to share. They pull you down a road where men gather in uneven lines, learning to move as one. Boots scuff dirt, muskets glint. Voices shout commands that sound clipped and certain, the way people speak when they want the universe to obey them. War is coming, or war is already here, depending on where you stand and what year it is in your pocket, and where war goes. Medicine follows, not gracefully, but urgently, because bodies break faster than theories can keep up. You find the field hospital by smell before you see it. Blood, sweat, waste, vinegar fumes, smoke from a nearby fire. It is a rough camp set up near a cluster of tents and buildings. Men lie on straw pallets. Some moan, some stare. Some are silent in a way that makes your skin prickle. A surgeon moves between them like a man trying to outrun time. Mainstream historical fact lands hard. During the Revolutionary War era, medical care is provided by military surgeons and assistants working in makeshift hospitals. Conditions are often crowded and unsanitary. Supplies are limited. Infection and disease kill as many or more soldiers than battle wounds. Amputation is common for severe limb injuries, especially from musket balls and artillery. You see it immediately. A soldier's leg is shattered, bone splintered by impact. The limb is not salvageable in this setting. The surgeon looks once, then calls for the saw. There is no preamble, no gentle pacing. Speed is mercy here, even though it doesn't feel like it. Assistants hold the man down. Someone presses a leather strap into his mouth. Another gives him a drink that burns on the way down. Rum again, doing its best to be anesthesia and failing with heroic determination. Joke number 1, whispered with a hollow laugh. The founding of a nation is sponsored by alcohol and screaming. The surgeon works fast. Knife, clamp, tie, saw. Blood pours. The smell of it mixes with sweat and smoke. Flies hover, uninvited, as if they've been scheduled. The soldier's eyes roll back. Whether he faints from pain, fear, or blood loss doesn't matter. Unconsciousness is relief either way. The limb is tossed aside into a pile you wish you hadn't noticed. A literal pile. You stare for half a second too long, and your brain tries to make it unreal. It doesn't succeed. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on speed in battlefield amputations was primarily about reducing pain and shock, or about the sheer volume of casualties forcing surgeons to work like machines. Standing here, you suspect the answer is brutally simple. Both. Compassion and logistics can wear the same face when the face is exhausted. You move deeper into the hospital area and see another threat. Quieter but deadlier. Men coughing. Men sweating with fever. Men shaking with chills. Dysentery. Typhus. Smallpox. The diseases that spread through camps, where men live packed together with poor sanitation, contaminated water, and limited food. Battle wounds are dramatic. But camp disease is relentless. Like rot. A man lies on his side, too weak to lift his head. The surgeon isn't even with him. Another medic offers water, wipes his face, murmurs reassurance. There is little else to do. Treatments are still bleeding, purging, and hope. Sometimes the best care is clean water and rest, but those are not always available. Quirky tidbit, grimly practical. Some military camps attempt sanitation measures like digging latrines and placing them downwind, separating sick men when possible, and burning or washing bedding, even though the logic is framed in miasma terms rather than germs. They don't know why it helps. They just notice that filth correlates with death. You watch an orderly carry a bucket of water past you, and it feels like watching someone carry gold. Clean water is a medical supply. It can mean survival. In one corner, you see a man biting on an actual bullet, not a metaphor. Someone has shoved a musket ball into his mouth to keep him from biting through his tongue during a procedure. His cheeks are wet with tears, and he looks straight at you with a stare that is both pleading and furious, as if to say, if you are from the future, do something. There is nothing you can do. Not here. Not now. Joke number 2. Quiet and bleak. You finally understand why people romanticize the past. They're trying not to picture this part. The surgeon removes a ball from a shoulder wound with forceps. Digging. Probing. The patient screams and then curses, and you're grateful for the profanity because it proves he still has fight in him. The surgeon wraps the wound, moves on. There are too many bodies. Outside, wagons arrive with more injured. The rhythm is endless. The surgeon's hands are red, his apron darker than ever. He wipes sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist, then reaches for another instrument. No gloves, no sterile field, just hands and urgency. Historians still argue whether the Revolutionary War significantly improved American medical practice by forcing organizational changes like better record keeping and hospital systems. or whether it mainly revealed how unprepared medicine was for mass trauma. You can see both. War accelerates learning, but it also amplifies every weakness. You step near a table where instruments are laid out. They are rinsed quickly in water, maybe wiped with cloth. That's it. Infection, in your mind, is screaming. In their minds. Infection is bad luck, bad air, or the wound turning. They sometimes describe it as the flesh mortifying. The word itself sounds like a warning. A young assistant is trying to comfort a soldier whose arm is bandaged. The soldier stares at his stump as if it belongs to someone else. He whispers, "How will I work?" Not "how will I fight?" Work. Survival. Future. The war has taken more than flesh. It has taken a man's place in the world. You realize the battlefield creates not only medical crises but social ones. Disabled veterans, widows, orphans, communities strained by loss. Medicine here isn't just about keeping people alive. It's about trying to put shattered lives back into some shape that can function. As the sun begins to dip, the hospital becomes a blur of groans and orders and the scraping sound of sore teeth. You find yourself focusing on tiny details to stay grounded. A candle flickering, a cloth being wrung out, a hand squeezing another hand. Small human gestures that survive even inside horror. Joke number 3. Softer now. If anyone ever tells you the past was simpler, you're allowed to hand them a saw and a bottle of rum and ask them to demonstrate. When you finally step away, your clothes feel like they've absorbed the air. You breathe deeply outside the camp and try to convince your body that it is safe, but it doesn't fully believe you. Your mind keeps replaying the look in the soldier's eyes when the bullet went into his mouth. You walk, following the road away from the drums, away from the tents, and you realize that wartime medicine is both the worst and the most revealing version of this era's practices. It strips away pretense. It shows what is effective, what is useless, and what is simply tradition clinging to itself. And then, as you pass a small gathering near a fire, you hear something that makes your skin crawl in a different way. Not about surgery, not about battle, about cures that sound like folklore dragged into the daylight. Someone is talking about drinking blood for strength. Someone else is talking about grinding up strange materials for medicine. Corpse medicine, vampire cures. You slow your steps, because you know you're about to enter the part of history that feels like a nightmare someone wrote down and then sold as a prescription. The fire crackles low, the kind of sound that invites secrets. You stop just outside the circle of light where a few figures huddle, faces half-lit, voices lowered, not out of shame exactly, but caution. This is knowledge you don't shout. This is knowledge you pass hand to hand. Like contraband hope. Someone says the word strength, and it lands heavy. Someone else says blood, and the night seems to lean closer. You listen as if your body already knows it shouldn't, and you realize you've stepped into the realm of remedies that feel less like medicine and more like folklore that lost its way into a medical bag. Mainstream historical fact. Unsettling but real. Early modern medicine, including in parts of 1700s America, still carries remnants of European traditions, sometimes called corpse medicine, where substances derived from human remains or blood are believed to have healing properties. These ideas don't dominate daily practice, but they linger at the edges, especially in times of desperation. A man near the fire speaks about a soldier who drank the blood of a freshly killed enemy, believing it would restore vitality. Another mentions powdered skull, imported from Europe, sold as a remedy for epilepsy or convulsions. Someone else whispers about mummy powder. Literal ground remains from ancient bodies, Once used in European medicine and occasionally found in colonial apothecaries through trade networks. You feel your stomach drop. Not because this is suddenly medieval and savage, but because it's disturbingly logical in its own warped way. If life force is carried in blood, then blood must give life. If strength lives in bone, then bone must strengthen. It's sympathetic magic wearing a lab coat it hasn't earned yet. Quirky tidbit. The kind that makes your brain pause mid-breath. Powdered mummy, called mumia, is once a legitimate European medicinal substance, believed to treat everything from bleeding to bruises. By the 1700s, its use is declining, but the idea that human remains carry healing power hasn't fully disappeared. Medicine does not shed old skins all at once. It molts in patches. You ask carefully, as if tone might save you, whether this actually works. A man shrugs. He says sometimes people feel better. He says sometimes people don't. He says sometimes belief is the point. That sentence echoes louder than the fire. Historians still argue whether these practices persist, mainly because of cultural inertia, or whether they reflect the brutal arithmetic of survival when conventional medicine fails. When bleeding, purging, surgery, and prayer all fall short. People reach for meaning wherever it hides, even in places that make future generations recoil. You hear another story, quieter now, about drinking fresh animal blood instead of human blood, about slaughterhouses being places of both food and medicine. Blood is warm. Blood is alive. Blood is power. At least, that's the story. Joke number 1. Thin and tired. This is when you realize the phrase, "Don't knock it till you've tried it," should absolutely have limits. A woman mentions a cure for wasting illness. She describes grinding bone into powder, mixing it with wine, and administering it in small doses. She swears it helped her cousin regain appetite. You don't ask what happened later. There are some follow-up questions you instinctively avoid. The fire pops. Someone crosses themselves. Someone laughs nervously. No one sounds entirely convinced, but no one dismisses the idea outright either. That's the dangerous part. These remedies don't thrive on certainty. They thrive on possibility. You notice how often desperation strips away disgust. When someone you love is fading, you stop caring where a remedy comes from. You care whether it might buy time. Medicine in this era often exists in that narrow gap between "I don't like this" and "I can't do nothing." Historians still argue whether corpse-based remedies were ever widespread in colonial America, or whether they mostly survive in anecdotes and fringe practices. Standing here, you sense that even if they are there, their presence matters. They reveal how far people will go when suffering becomes unbearable and explanations run out. As the conversation drifts, someone brings up another kind of unnatural medicine. Not from the dead, but from the feared vampire cures. The word feels out of place, like a storybook intruding on real life. But in this era, folklore and medicine share a hallway. They talk about wasting sicknesses, about families watching one member decline after another, pale and thin, as if something is draining them. In some communities, especially influenced by European traditions, this pattern is explained through the idea of the dead feeding on the living. The remedy is drastic. Exhume the body, burn or destroy certain parts, scatter ashes. It's not framed as superstition. It's framed as intervention. Joke number 2. Barely there. When your public health policy involves shovels and fire, you know things have gone off the rails. You don't see this yourself, but you hear enough to understand how medicine, fear, and folklore braid together tightly when there is no clear scientific anchor. These actions are attempts to stop disease, to interrupt a pattern, to protect the living, even if it means violating the peace of the dead. And in a twisted way, you can see the shadow of epidemiology hiding inside the myth. People notice patterns of spread. They notice clusters of illness. They search for a cause that feels actionable. They just don't have the right map. Historians still argue whether vampire panics and similar beliefs functioned as primitive explanations for diseases like tuberculosis, or whether they primarily reflected cultural anxieties about death, decay, and inheritance. Again, both can be true. Humans are very good at stacking meanings until something feels solid. The fire burns lower. The stories quiet. People drift away, each carrying a different weight of belief. You stand there, looking at the embers, thinking about how medicine in this century stretches from surgical steel to whispered folklore without much embarrassment. Everything is on the table if it promises life. You walk back through town, past homes where more ordinary remedies are being brewed. Teas, poultices, tonics. These feel suddenly gentle by comparison, like medicine pulling back from a cliff edge. And as you move, you hear another argument rising in the distance, not about blood or bones this time, but about who should be trusted to heal at all. A preacher is speaking loudly about divine will. An indigenous healer is being mentioned in hushed tones. A doctor is insisting on European training. The town is negotiating authority. Medicine is no longer just about substances and procedures. It's about worldviews colliding, about whose knowledge counts, about who gets to define what healing even means. You feel yourself pulled toward that collision, because the next thing you're about to witness isn't a single remedy, but a cultural argument playing out in sick rooms and sermons and forests alike. Doctors, preachers, shamans, all claiming the body, all claiming truth. You can hear the argument before you see it. Voices spilling out of a doorway into the street like steam escaping a kettle. One voice is sharp and practiced, the kind of tone that comes from being listened to by default. Another is warm and rhythmic, the tone of someone used to speaking into silence until it finally pays attention. A third voice cuts in now and then with moral certainty, the kind that doesn't need evidence because it has scripture. You step into the edge of a crowded room and feel the tension instantly. A sick child lies on a pallet near the hearth, cheeks flushed, breath quick. The mother kneels beside them, stroking their hair as if touch alone might hold the fever back. Nearby, a physician stands with his bag and his theories. A minister stands with his Bible and his warnings. And in the doorway, half in shadow, stands an indigenous healer invited by the family, then immediately made unwelcome by everyone's discomfort. This is not a medical consultation. It is a contest of reality, mainstream historical fact. Steady and important. In 1700s America, multiple healing traditions coexist and compete. European-trained physicians and surgeons practice alongside midwives and herbalists, while indigenous communities maintain sophisticated medicinal knowledge rooted in local plants, ceremony, and community practices. Enslaved Africans and their descendants also bring healing traditions that influence colonial medicine. These systems interact in complex ways, sometimes sharing remedies, sometimes clashing over authority. The physician clears his throat and declares the child's humors are heated. He recommends bleeding or a purge. Perhaps both, to bring down the fever and restore balance. He speaks as if the body is a malfunctioning furnace that simply needs the right valve opened. The minister frowns and reminds everyone that illness can be a test, a judgment, a call to repentance. He recommends prayer, fasting, and moral reflection. He might not forbid medical care, but he wants spiritual hierarchy maintained. The soul first, the body second. The indigenous healer says little at first. When they do speak, it is not in the language of humors or sin. They talk about the child's breathing, the heat of the skin, the smell of sweat, the pattern of the fever. They mention plants that can ease the lungs, reduce inflammation, help the body rest. They speak in a grounded way that makes the room feel temporarily less frantic. The physician bristles, not necessarily because the suggestions are bad, but because the source is wrong in the social sense. The healer's knowledge is not validated by European institutions. It is validated by generations and outcomes, which should be enough. But power doesn't run on should. Historians still argue whether early American physicians borrowed indigenous plant knowledge primarily through respectful exchange, or through appropriation and exploitation disguised as curiosity. You can feel the tension in the room. Some colonists seek indigenous remedies when European methods fail, yet they often dismiss indigenous practitioners socially and politically. The mother, meanwhile, just wants her child to live. She doesn't care whose worldview wins. She cares about breathing. She cares about the child's skin cooling. She cares about the eyes opening with recognition. The physician insists on bleeding. The minister cautions against pagan remedies. The indigenous healer offers an herbal infusion and a poultice, along with guidance to keep the child hydrated and cool, but not chilled. The mother looks between them like someone forced to choose which cliff to fall off. Joke number 1. Quiet. If stress were curable, half the room would need emergency treatment. The child coughs, a small, painful sound. The mother flinches. The healer steps forward and asks permission. Hands open, posture respectful. The mother nods. The healer touches the child's wrist, listens to breath, then prepares a small mixture from a pouch, adding it to warm water. The scent is earthy, green, bitter, not a magic potion, just plant chemistry and knowledge of the land. The physician makes a small scoffing sound, but you notice he doesn't leave. He watches, because even when pride is loud, curiosity whispers, and sometimes curiosity wins. Quirky tidbit. Grounded and oddly hopeful, many indigenous medicinal practices rely on local botanicals that European settlers come to value, sometimes adopting them into colonial pharmacopoeias. Plants like certain barks, roots, and leaves become part of colonial medicine, not because Europeans invent them, but because they encounter knowledge that already exists and works. The tragedy is that the knowledge is often extracted while the people who hold it are marginalized. The minister begins praying aloud. It's not gentle. It's the kind of prayer that sounds like it's trying to bully the universe. The mother bows her head anyway, because she can't afford to reject any help, even emotional help, even if it comes wrapped in judgment. The physician decides to compromise, which is rare and telling. He postpones bleeding, for now, and suggests monitoring. He allows the herbal infusion, though he frames it as harmless comfort rather than true medicine. This is how power concedes, by pretending it isn't conceding. Historians still argue whether this kind of pragmatic blending of traditions improved outcomes for patients, or whether it mostly served colonial authority by absorbing useful remedies while dismissing the worldview behind them. In this room, blending is simply survival. A mother stacking every possible form of hope like blankets. You step outside later, and the argument continues in other forms. In the street, you hear someone say indigenous healers are dangerous. Someone else says they have cures for fevers the doctors can't touch. You hear someone accuse a minister of scaring people away from needed care. You hear someone accuse doctors of arrogance. Everybody is partly right and mostly defensive. Medicine here is a battleground of legitimacy. In a nearby settlement, you hear of an indigenous community treating illness with ceremony as well as herbs. The ceremony isn't extra. It's part of healing. Because health is not separated from community, land, and spirit. Colonists often misunderstand this, reducing it to superstition, missing the social and psychological power of shared ritual. Modern, you recognizes that community support matters, even if you don't share the metaphysics. Joke number 2. Gentle. Turns out the placebo effect is just another way of saying humans are complicated. You also hear stories about African healing traditions moving quietly beneath colonial life, carried by enslaved people who have to practice knowledge in secret or under scrutiny. Remedies using local plants, techniques for managing pain, methods for supporting childbirth. This knowledge sometimes enters white households through necessity, then gets rebranded as folk wisdom without credit. The flow of medicine follows the flow of power. Historians still argue whether colonial medicine would have developed differently if indigenous and African knowledge had been respected as equal systems rather than mined for parts. It's a big question. In the small scale of daily life, you can see the answer in how remedies move. Plant knowledge adopted, people dismissed as dusk settles. You return to the house with the sick child. The fever has eased slightly. The child's breathing is calmer. Maybe it's the herbs. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's hydration and rest. Maybe it's all of it stacked together. The mother looks less panicked, but she doesn't relax. She has learned that improvement can reverse fast. The physician returns and feels the child's forehead. He grunts approval, as if the body is responding to his authority through sheer respect. The minister thanks God loudly. The healer simply nods and begins packing their pouch, already disappearing back into the doorway. Back into the margins. You watch the healer leave and feel a low anger you can't quite place. Not at any one person, but at the structure of it all. The way knowledge is accepted only when it comes from the right mouth. The way healing gets tangled with conquest. The town quiets. The argument fades, but the fault lines remain. And you realize the next story you're pulled toward is one where those fault lines cut especially deep. The quarters where enslaved people live, where healing is necessity, secrecy, and resistance all at once. Because in 1700s America, medicine is not only about bodies, it is about who is allowed to protect a body. You follow a dim path toward the edge of a plantation, toward lamps that burn low and voices that stay careful. Toward the underground pharmacopoeia, the path narrows as you leave the brighter houses behind. The light changes first, then the sound. Fewer voices, more insects, the steady rhythm of night pressing in. You know, instinctively, that you are entering a place where knowledge survives quietly. Because loud knowledge attracts attention, and attention here can be dangerous. The quarters sit a little apart, close enough to serve, far enough to isolate. Small structures, low roofs, smoke curling thinly from chimneys. Inside, lamps burn low and conversations stay measured. Not because there is nothing to say, but because some things are safer when they travel by whisper. This is where healing is not a profession. It is a necessity. Mainstream historical fact, heavy and undeniable. Enslaved Africans and their descendants in 1700s, America developed and preserved medical knowledge drawn from African traditions and adapted to the plants and conditions of the Americas. Enslaved healers treat injuries, illness, childbirth, and poisonings, often with limited resources and under constant surveillance. Their knowledge is sometimes sought by enslavers when European medicine fails. Even as it is feared and suppressed, you are invited inside by a woman with tired eyes and steady hands. She is not called a doctor. She is called when someone is sick, when a child burns with fever, When a wound festers, when a body breaks under labor and needs help that cannot wait for permission, she shows you small bundles, hidden carefully. Roots, bark, dried leaves. Each one has a story. Each one has been tested by need. She does not speak in humors. She speaks in effects. This eases pain. This stops bleeding. This helps sleep. This one you use carefully, because it can harm as much as help. You recognize the pattern now. True knowledge always comes with warnings. Quirky tidbit, grounded and powerful. Many enslaved healers possess detailed knowledge of toxic and medicinal plants, sometimes including substances that can be used as poisons in tiny doses and medicines in others. This knowledge creates fear among enslavers, because healing and harming can look similar from the outside. Power is nervous around anything it cannot fully control. A man lies on a pallet with a deep cut on his arm, likely from work. It is swollen and angry. The woman cleans it carefully, using warm water and an herbal wash. She applies a poultice that smells sharp and green. She binds it with clean cloth. Her movements are efficient. No performance, no theory lecture. Just action. You realize something important. Cleanliness matters here. Not because of germ theory, but because experience has taught it matters. Wounds that are cleaned do better. People who are kept hydrated survive more often. Rest matters. These truths are learned the hard way, passed along quietly, and rarely credited. Historians still argue whether African-derived medical practices in colonial America influenced mainstream medicine more than historical records acknowledge. The answer is almost certainly yes. Knowledge flows upward when necessity forces it, even if the names of those who provided it are erased. Later, you sit near a woman in labor. The room is warm. The air smells of sweat and herbs. Other women surround her, offering support, holding her, guiding her breathing. There is no male authority here, no external judgment. This is communal care. The woman helping with the birth knows what to do. She has done it before. Many times. The birth is hard. The mother cries out. The women murmur encouragement. Rhythm and reassurance weaving together. They adjust her position. They offer water. They massage her back. This is midwifery shaped by survival, not ceremony. The baby arrives. A sharp cry fills the room, followed by laughter and tears that come too fast. The helper checks the mother, manages bleeding, ensures the baby is breathing well. She stays long after the drama passes, because postpartum danger is real. And leaving too early is how women die. Joke number 1. Soft and respectful. The most advanced medical technology in this room is people who know what they're doing and stay put. You hear about remedies for stomach illness, for fevers, for parasites. You hear about methods for preventing illness when living conditions are brutal, boiling water when possible, eating certain plants, avoiding others. These are not luxury choices. They are survival strategies. You also hear about secrecy, about hiding certain knowledge because it can be misinterpreted or punished, about practicing healing in ways that look innocuous to overseers, about passing information at night, during work, through song or story. Knowledge becomes camouflage. Historians still argue whether enslaved healers were tolerated primarily because they reduced costs for enslavers by keeping laborers alive, or whether there was genuine recognition of their skill beneath the racism. Toleration is not respect, but it is a crack where knowledge can survive. You notice how often enslavers seek out these healers quietly when European treatments fail. A fever that won't break, a wound that won't heal, a child who will not wake. The healer is summoned, sometimes under threat, sometimes with grudging acknowledgement. If the person recovers, the credit disappears upward. If they die, Blame can travel downward. The emotional weight of this hits you slowly. Medicine here is resistance. Keeping someone alive is an act of defiance. Passing knowledge forward is rebellion. Healing becomes a way of insisting on humanity in a system designed to deny it. Joke number 2. Barely a joke. Turns out underground medicine is literal when you're not allowed to be visible. As the night deepens, you step back outside. The lamps dim. People sleep when they can. You carry the smell of herbs with you. Grounding. Real. You think about how much of what you've seen so far has been shaped by who gets to speak and who gets silenced. The next place you're drawn toward is quieter still. But in a different way. It's not secrecy now. It's isolation. It's houses marked, doors shut, ships anchored offshore with flags raised, fever houses, quarantine, pestilence ships, medicine trying, clumsily, to think collectively. You follow the path toward the water, where lanterns sway and warning signs hang. Because the town has decided that sickness needs boundaries. And boundaries, like everything else here, are improvised. The closer you get to the water, the more the air tastes like salt and worry. Lanterns hang on posts along the dock, their light wavering with the wind like it can't quite commit to staying. Men stand in small clusters, speaking in low tones, the kind of low that signals trouble and money and risk all tangled together. Out in the dark, a ship sits anchored away from shore. It is close enough to see, far enough to feel like a threat. A flag flutters, not celebratory, but warning. You watch longboat shadows move back and forth like nervous insects, carrying barrels and messages and sometimes bodies. This is what quarantine looks like before anyone is fully sure what they're quarantining. Mainstream historical fact drifts in with the tide. Port towns in 1700s America often attempt quarantine measures during outbreaks, especially when ships arrive from regions known to have disease. Authorities may isolate vessels offshore, restrict movement, and confine the sick in designated buildings or pest houses. The logic is partly correct, but inconsistent enforcement and limited understanding of transmission often undermine it. You hear the locals call the isolated buildings fever houses, pest houses, sometimes just that place. Like naming it too clearly might invite it closer. These are crude structures set apart from the town. They're meant to protect the healthy by containing the sick. That's the idea. The reality is harder. You walk toward one of these houses with a small group delivering supplies. The path is quiet. Even the night animals seem cautious. The building sits alone. Windows dark, door heavy. A sign is nailed up, a warning in ink that has run slightly from rain. It's not elegant. It's survival. A man opens the door just enough to accept a bundle of food and cloth, then closes it quickly. He doesn't want conversation. He wants distance. You hear coughing inside, deep and wet. You smell something sour and stale. Sweat, sickness, unwashed bedding, fear soaking into wood. Quirky tidbit, bleakly practical. In many places, quarantine is enforced not only by law, but by community pressure. Neighbors watch who goes where. Houses are marked. People suspected of exposure may be shunned, even if they are healthy. The social boundary can be sharper than any official one. Historians still argue whether early quarantine measures in colonial America were effective public health strategies given the era's limited knowledge, or whether they mainly served as symbolic actions that reassured the healthy while doing little for the sick. Standing here, you can see the tragedy. Quarantine might reduce spread, but it also concentrates suffering behind a door. You move back to the dock where the ship waits. Someone tells you it came in with fever on board. Another swears it's smallpox. Another says it's ship sickness, a vague category that covers everything from typhus to dysentery. The crew is not allowed ashore. Trade is delayed. Merchants scowl. Families worry. The town's economy and the town's survival tug in opposite directions like two children fighting over the same blanket. A small boat rows out to the ship carrying an official and a physician. The physician's posture is stiff, cautious. He will not go below a deck if he can avoid it. He will stand at a safe distance and ask questions that drift up from the shadows. How many are sick? How long? What symptoms? Any rash? Any bleeding? Any delirium? The answers come back muddled. The crew is exhausted. The sick can barely speak. The physician tries to decide what danger this ship carries with the tools of an era that still thinks air can be corrupted and that disease can ride on smell. He orders the ship held, supplies delivered, no one allowed ashore. The crew pleads. The captain argues. The town officials hold the line, because the memory of the last outbreak is still fresh enough to hurt. Joke number 1. Quiet. This is the earliest version of "You can't come in. You might ruin everything." Except the everything is literally everyone's lungs. You walk along the shore and see another quarantine practice. Household isolation. A family has hung a warning cloth on their door. Neighbors leave food at a distance. Children are told not to approach. The family inside is trapped between protecting others and needing help. Sometimes they receive care. Sometimes they are abandoned. You see a woman open her door crack and look out with haunted eyes. She doesn't step outside. She knows what it would mean. She knows the whispers would begin, that her family would be labeled. She closes the door again, sealing herself back into the heat and stink of sickness. Historians still argue whether quarantine practices in this era were shaped more by scientific observation or by fear and moral judgment. The marked door looks like public health. It also looks like stigma. And stigma has always traveled well. Later, you hear about ships being forced to wait for weeks, crews dying offshore, bodies dumped at sea. The town tells itself this is necessary, that the boundary must hold. That sacrifice must be made somewhere, and it cannot be in the streets. But you also hear stories of corruption, of bribes to let someone slip ashore, of merchants hiding illness to protect profit, of officials looking away. The boundary is always negotiable when money is involved, and disease loves negotiation. Quirky tidbit: some quarantine stations use fumigation practices, burning tar, sulfur, or vinegar to cleanse the air and goods. Cargo is aired out. Clothing is smoked. People believe smell equals danger, so they fight smell with harsher smell. The result is an environment that is both infected and suffocating. Joke number 2, softly. The cure for bad air is apparently making the air worse until you can't smell your fear anymore. You visit the fever house again near dawn. The coughing is quieter now, and that scares you more than loud coughing. Quiet can mean rest. Quiet can mean death. The door opens, and a caretaker steps out, face lined with exhaustion. They have been inside for days. They smell like sickness and smoke and resignation. They tell you they do what they can. Water, broth, fresh cloth, sometimes bleeding. If a physician insists, sometimes herbal infusions, sometimes just cooling the forehead and listening. They cannot fix the disease. They can only witness it with kindness. Historians still argue whether the creation of pest houses marks an early step toward modern public health infrastructure, or whether these facilities primarily functioned as dumping grounds for the sick and poor. Again, the answer depends on where you stand. For the town, it is protection. For the people inside, it can feel like exile. As the sun rises, pale and cold, You watch the ship still anchored offshore. The flag still flutters. The water still moves, indifferent. The town resumes its routines cautiously, like someone walking on ice after hearing it crack. You turn away from the harbor with salt on your lips and a heavy feeling in your chest that isn't illness, just empathy. Quarantine is a medicine with a boundary line. Medicine is policy. Medicine that admits it doesn't know how to cure and so tries to contain. And now, after all these practices, you begin to understand why some colonial practitioners keep meticulous notes, why they write down cases, why they collect symptoms and outcomes like a person trying to assemble truth from fragments. Because when you can't control disease, you at least try to understand it on paper. You're about to open a physician's handwritten tome, a medical book of horrors. The book is heavier than it looks. Its leather cover warped slightly as if it has absorbed years of damp air and worse memories. You open it carefully, not out of reverence, but because the spine looks like it might give up if you startle it. The pages inside are thick, uneven, stained in places by ink and by things that are definitely not ink. This is not a textbook meant to teach students. This is a record meant to remember, a physician's casebook. You sit near a window where the light is good enough to read without a candle, and you begin turning pages slowly, because rushing feels disrespectful, and also because some of the entries make your stomach tighten before you even finish the sentence. Mainstream historical fact settles quietly. Many physicians in the 1700s keep handwritten casebooks documenting patients, symptoms, treatments, and outcomes. These records are personal, idiosyncratic, and often brutally honest. They serve as memory aids, teaching tools, and attempts to find patterns in illness long before modern clinical studies exist. The handwriting varies. Some entries are neat and careful. Others look rushed, scratched out, rewritten, as if the doctor was writing between emergencies or after nights without sleep. Dates are marked. Names are sometimes given, sometimes reduced to initials, sometimes erased entirely when the outcome is grim. Mrs. Hun, age about 30. Fever, bled twice, purged, no relief. Died on the 4th day, just like that. No apology, no reflection, just a fact placed on the page like a stone. You turn another page. Child, male, 6. Convulsions, applied blister to neck, administered calomel, seemed calmer, expired before dawn. Your breath catches. The word expired is so polite, so final. The ink does not tremble. The hand that wrote it might have. But the page doesn't show that. Historians still argue whether these casebooks represent the beginnings of empirical medicine, or whether they mainly catalog suffering without truly improving outcomes. Reading them, you realize they are both. They are attempts to wrestle order from chaos using the only tool available: observation. You keep reading. Sometimes the entries are longer, almost hopeful. Mr. Toot, long-standing cough. Tried bleeding without benefit. Gave laudanum at night. Slept well. Appetite improved. Continued same. Recovery slow but apparent. You pause. This one lived, or at least improved. You feel a small, irrational lift in your chest, like you found a survivor in a list of shipwrecks. Then the next page pulls you back down. Woman brought in delirious. High fever. Bled heavily. Grew weaker. Died same evening. No commentary, no self-critique. The page does not ask whether bleeding hastened death. It simply records that bleeding occurred, then death followed. The reader is left to connect or ignore the dots. Quirky tidbit, quietly fascinating. Some physicians annotate their own failures with small marks, symbols, or marginal notes. a question mark, a line drawn through a treatment, a phrase like too late or violent disease. These tiny additions suggest doubt creeping in at the edges of certainty. You notice patterns forming as you read. Bleeding is everywhere. Purging is everywhere. Blistering, cupping, opiates. The same tools used again and again, regardless of outcome. But you also notice something else. Occasionally, a note says, did little, or kept comfortable, or no bleeding. Those entries stand out like whispers of rebellion. Historians still argue whether some physicians gradually recognized the limits of aggressive treatment and began practicing restraint, or whether these were exceptions born of circumstance rather than philosophy. Sitting here, you can feel a mind trying to learn in a world that does not make learning easy. One entry stops you cold. Patient declined all remedies. Given broth and rest only. Lived, it's just one line, but it feels louder than the rest. Joke number 1. Soft and rueful. Sometimes the most radical treatment is leaving the body alone. You flip further and find sections devoted to epidemics. Pages filled faster here, lines packed close together, as if the doctor was racing the disease with ink. Names blur, dates stack. The same symptoms repeat. Fever, rash, weakness, delirium, death, recovery, death again. There is frustration in the writing. You can feel it. The doctor notes when treatments fail repeatedly, even if he doesn't say so outright. He keeps using them anyway, because abandoning a method without a replacement feels like surrender. You find a page where the doctor has copied a passage from another physician's work, something about the benefits of fresh air and cleanliness. The handwriting changes slightly. Careful. Like this idea matters. The note in the margin reads, worth considering. Worth considering. In a book full of blood and loss, that phrase feels like a hinge. Quirky tidbit. Some physicians exchange casebooks or excerpts with colleagues, sharing observations through letters. This slow, uneven network of information is how medical ideas spread before journals and conferences. Knowledge travels at the speed of horseback and rumor. You imagine this doctor sitting by candlelight, rereading his own failures, trying to decide if the pattern means something, trying to reconcile his training with what he sees, trying not to drown in the weight of names that end with died. Historians still argue whether the rise of detailed case documentation contributed meaningfully to the eventual decline of practices like routine bloodletting. The answer may lie in these margins, in the quiet accumulation of doubt rather than any single breakthrough. As you reach the end of the book, the entries grow sparser, the ink lightens, the hand tires. The final page reads, much remains unknown. It is not poetic. It is not triumphant. It is honest. You close the book slowly and sit back, letting the silence fill in around you. Outside, life continues. Somewhere a child laughs. Somewhere someone coughs. Somewhere a practitioner sharpens a blade. The casebook has not given you solutions. It has given you something else. A glimpse of medicine becoming self-aware, not confident, not correct, but aware of its own limits. And in that awareness, you sense the first real crack in the old certainty, because once doubt enters, change becomes possible. You step outside with the image of ink-stained fingers still in your mind, and you hear a different kind of excitement buzzing through town. Not fear, not panic, curiosity. Someone is talking about experiments, about sparks and shocks, about a man who believes electricity might hold healing power, a man who enjoys flying kites into storms and asking the universe questions. You smile despite yourself, because you know where this is going. The age of bleeding bowls and blistering plasters is not over yet, but something new is flickering at the edges. Static, electric, Benjamin Franklin, and the idea that maybe, just maybe, the body could be studied rather than drained. The curiosity in town feels lighter than panic, but it still has that same electric edge, like everyone can sense a change in the air even if they can't name it. You hear people talking in the tavern, not about whose child is coughing or whose neighbor has a rash, but about demonstrations, experiments, a gentleman with a mind that won't sit still. Someone says, "Franklin," and the name travels through the room like a spark, jumping a gap. You follow the chatter to a parlor that has been rearranged to look respectable while secretly behaving like a laboratory. Chairs pushed back, curtains drawn, a table set up with glass jars, metal rods, and a device that looks like it belongs in a magic show. You recognize the mood immediately. Half science, half spectacle. The sweet spot where people feel brave enough to believe. Mainstream historical fact slides into place. Benjamin Franklin becomes widely known in the mid-1700s for his experiments with electricity, including work that leads to practical innovations like the lightning rod. His electrical demonstrations and writings help popularize electrical science in the colonies and beyond, sparking interest in medical, electrical treatments that some practitioners and experimenters try for various conditions. A man at the front speaks with the confidence of someone who has touched a new force and survived. He explains that electricity is not just lightning. It is something that can be stored, directed, shared. He gestures to a Leyden jar, an early device for storing static charge, and you feel the room lean forward. People love the idea of capturing power in a bottle. It makes nature seem less like a tyrant. A volunteer sits in a chair. The volunteer is not dying. That's important. This is not the surgeon's table or the fever house. This is closer to entertainment. But everyone is pretending it's also medicine, because that makes it feel noble. The demonstrator connects a wire, touches a rod, and suddenly the volunteer jolts, shoulders jumping, eyes widening. The crowd gasps, then laughs nervously. It isn't pain exactly. It's a startling slap from the unseen. Joke number 1, very soft. Congratulations. You have invented the jump scare. But for your nervous system, the demonstrator claims this can help with paralysis, with weak nerves, with melancholy, with sluggish circulation. He says electricity stimulates. He says it awakens dormant powers in the body. The language is familiar. Restore, strengthen, revive. Different tool, same hunger. You glance around and realize why this lands so well. Electricity feels modern. It feels clean compared to bloodletting. It's invisible, bright, almost magical, and it doesn't require a bowl. People want a future that doesn't smell like iron. The volunteer flexes their hand and says it feels warmer. Maybe it does. Static shocks can make muscles twitch. The sensation is real. The interpretation is the question, quirky tidbit that makes you grin despite yourself. Electric medicine becomes fashionable enough that some people pursue treatments as a kind of novelty, like booking an appointment with a force of nature. There are documented cases in the broader 18th century world of practitioners offering electrical therapy for various complaints, sometimes with elaborate devices, sometimes with simple static generators, and sometimes with claims that balloon far beyond what the evidence can support. When something is new and mysterious, it becomes a blank screen for hope. The demonstrator moves to another volunteer, this one with a stiff shoulder and lingering pain. He applies mild shocks in a pattern, watching the muscle jump. The volunteer grimaces, then says it feels looser. That could be placebo, muscle stimulation, distraction, or simply the relief of being cared for in a room where no one is holding a saw. Historians still argue whether early electrical therapies in the 1700s should be viewed primarily as pseudoscience dressed in novelty, or as a genuine early attempt to explore neuromuscular phenomena before modern physiology existed. Sitting in this room, you can see why both interpretations persist. Some claims are ridiculous. Some observations are real. The boundary between exploration and exploitation is thin, and it's always wobbling. The crowd is delighted. The shocks are small enough to be thrilling, not devastating. People clap as if the body is a stage and electricity is the star performer. A man in the back jokes that he wants his whole personality improved by lightning. Several people laugh too hard, which tells you their anxiety is looking for a way out. Joke number 2, whispered, "This is the first time anyone has tried to fix bad vibes with literal vibes." But it isn't only parlor theatrics. There's a quieter seriousness underneath. Franklin's work, and the broader Enlightenment mood, encourages people to observe, test, and question. You can feel a subtle shift from the body is governed by ancient rules to the body might have mechanisms we can discover. Not everyone embraces that shift, but it's happening. You step closer to a small stack of papers where someone has copied notes. Perhaps summaries of experiments, perhaps letters passed between curious minds. The language is careful. Terms like charge, conductor, insulator appear. The body becomes an object of inquiry, not just a container of humors. Then the conversation turns to lightning rods, and you feel the room's admiration sharpen. Because lightning rods are not a theory. They work. They protect buildings. They prevent fires. They save property and lives. That success lends electricity an aura of legitimacy in every domain, including medicine. The demonstrator leans into it. If electricity can tame lightning, he suggests, perhaps it can tame illness. The crowd nods. The leap is enormous, but the human mind loves a bridge between awe and relief. You think about the sick child from earlier, about fever houses, about the surgeon's apron. Compared to those, an electric shock seems almost gentle. It also feels like progress. And progress is intoxicating. Joke number 3. Quietly. In this century, progress often just means a new way to be uncomfortable. Later, you walk through town and see small signs of the electricity craze spreading. Someone has rigged up a crude static generator. Children dare each other to touch it and yelp when they feel the snap. A shopkeeper mentions a traveling electric doctor who treats headaches and sadness with sparks. The word electric becomes a marketing charm, like patent, like London, like pure. People are collecting labels as if labels are cures. You also notice pushback. A local physician scoffs, calling it frivolous. A minister warns against playing with forces meant for the heavens. A barber surgeon laughs and says, "Can electricity pull a tooth?" And the room laughs because the answer, in their minds, is no. So it must be useless. Everyone evaluates novelty through the lens of their own fear and trade. Historians still argue whether this wave of experimentation meaningfully accelerated medical change in America, or whether it mostly entertained and distracted, while old practices continued unchallenged. Walking these streets, you sense the truth is mixed. The bowls are still there. The lancets are still sharp. But now, alongside them, is a new habit, questioning. And questioning is contagious in a way that doesn't require quarantine. As the night settles, you find yourself thinking about the casebook again, that final line. Much remains unknown. Electricity doesn't erase that unknown. It just changes how people respond to it. Instead of treating ignorance like a permanent wall, some begin treating it like a door you can push on. You pass the apothecary and notice that even he is adapting. A new bottle sits in the window with a label that mentions electrical essence, which is almost certainly nonsense. But it proves the point. Medicine moves with culture. Whatever people believe might work becomes something you can sell. You pause outside a home where a family is caring for someone with a fever. No sparks here, just water, cloth, quiet voices. The mother wipes the patient's forehead and murmurs reassurance. The father watches helplessly. The old methods are still present in their minds. But so is a new softness, a new skepticism. They hesitate before calling for bleeding. They hesitate before purging. They consider rest, cleanliness, air. You realize the electric cures matter less for what they actually heal and more for what they represent. A turning of the mind toward experimentation and mechanism. A small cultural pivot away from pure tradition. And that pivot, slow as it is, sets up the final shift you're about to witness. Not a sudden miracle, but the beginning of reform. People arguing for training, for hygiene, for skepticism. People starting to separate showmanship from knowledge. The winds begin to change. You step into the darker, quieter end of town, and you can almost feel the future approaching like dawn you can't yet see. Not clean, not quick, but inevitable. The wind feels different tonight, not colder, not warmer, just less certain. It carries smoke and salt and the distant tang of manure like always. But there's something new threaded through it. A faint sense that the old answers are getting tired. You walk the streets you've been walking all along, past the apothecary's glowing bottles, past the barber surgeon's pole, past the church where prayers rise like steam, and you notice tiny shifts in how people talk. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough to make the air feel like it's tilting. A man at the tavern laughs less confidently about bleeding. A woman mentions she keeps her birthing cloths cleaner than her mother did. A physician grumbles about newfangled notions, which is often the first sign that a notion is becoming impossible to ignore. Mainstream historical fact arrives with a steadier voice now. By the late 1700s, some medical thinkers begin emphasizing observation, anatomy, and hygiene more than strict humoral balancing. Even though humoral ideas persist, medical education remains inconsistent in America. But networks of correspondence, published works, and growing institutions slowly push practice toward more standardized training and empirical methods. The change is gradual, uneven, and constantly resisted. You can see the resistance everywhere. Tradition has roots. Bleeding and purging are not just treatments. They are familiar rituals. They make illness feel manageable, even when they don't cure. People cling to familiar rituals because the alternative is admitting the universe can take your child without explanation. But you also see the quiet cracks. A physician you met earlier flips through his own notes with a frown. He points to entries where heavy bleeding preceded rapid decline. He doesn't announce a revolution. He simply says, almost to himself, perhaps not always. That phrase is the softest kind of rebellion. Historians still argue whether the decline of routine bloodletting began more because of new scientific understanding or because of the slow accumulation of practical disappointment. You suspect disappointment is underrated. People will defend a theory for a long time. They will defend their pride even longer. But repeated failure has a way of eroding certainty like water erodes stone. You visit an apothecary who has started separating his powders more carefully, keeping certain preparations away from moisture, away from cross-contamination. He doesn't say germs. He says spoiling. He says foulness. He says, I have noticed. That's enough. Observation is a seed. In a household, you see a mother insist on boiling water before mixing a child's drink. She learned it from a neighbor who lost 2 sons to stomach illness. No one calls it microbiology. They call it caution. They call it doing what seems to work. Joke number 1. Softly. Humanity's greatest medical breakthrough might just be, that seemed bad last time. You walk past a small gathering of practitioners arguing. One claims medicine needs more formal training, not just apprenticeships and guesswork. Another claims formal training is elitist nonsense and that experience matters more. Both are right in different ways. Apprenticeship can create skilled hands. Formal education can spread broader knowledge. The real problem is inconsistency and the lack of shared standards. And that's where you start to feel the tug of something bigger than a single town, the beginnings of professionalization. Not complete, not clean, but beginning. People are starting to ask who should be allowed to call themselves a doctor. People are starting to value anatomy, dissection, and structured learning more openly, even if they also fear these practices morally. Quirky tidbit, a little eerie in the best way. Anatomy studies in this era can be socially controversial, and bodies for dissection are scarce. This scarcity fuels rumor and fear about grave robbing and disrespect for the dead. The push for anatomical knowledge is real progress, but it comes with a shadow side that makes communities uneasy. Medicine's growth often steps on someone's dignity. Historians still argue whether public distrust of doctors in the late 1700s is mainly due to harmful treatments like bleeding and calomel, or due to broader cultural suspicion of elite authority. You can feel the distrust in how people talk. They want help, but they don't want to be experimented on. They want certainty, but they don't trust anyone who claims too much of it. You notice the language changing too. People still say humors, but they also say inflammation. They talk about nerves with more seriousness. They speak about contagion with sharper attention, even if they can't describe microbes. They start to accept that some diseases spread person to person, not just through bad air. Quarantine measures, crude as they are, become more deliberate. In one home, a family isolates a sick child and washes cloths more frequently. The father grumbles about the work, then does it anyway. The mother doesn't argue. She just keeps moving. It's not ideology. It's survival. Joke number 2. Gentle. The revolution isn't always muskets and speeches. Sometimes it's laundry. You think back over everything you've seen. Bloodletting bowls, tooth worms, hot irons, mercury purges, cupping circles, tobacco smoke enemas, patent bottles with secret ingredients, battlefield saws, corpse cures whispered by firelight. All of it feels like a long, human attempt to stand in front of suffering and refuse to be completely helpless. And that, oddly, is what connects the old medicine to the new, the desire to do something. The difference is that the new something slowly begins to include skepticism, begins to include careful observation, begins to include the radical idea that you should measure outcomes and change behavior when the outcome is consistently terrible. Historians still argue whether early American medicine truly turned in the late 1700s, or whether the real transformation waits until the 1800s, with broader institutional growth and later scientific advances. The truth, as you walk through the dim streets, is that transformation doesn't arrive with a trumpet. It arrives like dawn, pale at first, easy to miss if you're not watching, but relentless. You reach a hill overlooking the town. Chimneys smoke softly. Lanterns flicker. Somewhere, a midwife is helping a mother through labor with steady hands. Somewhere, an apothecary is measuring powders. Somewhere, a physician is debating whether to bleed or to wait. Somewhere, a family is simply holding a sick person's hand, because love is older than theory. And you understand that what passed for medicine in 1700s America isn't a punchline. It's a portrait of humans trying to help with incomplete maps. Sometimes they help, sometimes they harm, often they do both at once. Because knowledge is not kind in its early stages. You let the wind cool your face, and you imagine the future threads pulling forward: cleaner hospitals, trained nurses, better anatomy, germ theory, vaccines that don't require scraping disease into skin, pain relief that doesn't come in the form of rum and prayer. None of that is here yet. But the question that will build it is here. Why? Why does this work sometimes and not others? Why do some people survive? Why do patterns repeat? Why do certain habits reduce illness? That question, once it takes root, becomes the beginning of real medicine. Joke number 3. Soft as a sigh. It turns out the most dangerous thing you can give a human is curiosity, because we'll use it to invent both antibiotics and the electric chair. You turn back toward the town and start walking slowly, letting the sounds soften: the clink of glass, the distant murmur of voices, the hush of wind through bare branches. You feel the long arc of the century behind you like a road you've traveled on foot, each step marked by bowls and blades and herbs and whispered prayers. And now, because you've reached the end of the journey, you let your pace slow even more. You let your thoughts loosen their grip. You let the images fade, not sharply, but gently, like smoke thinning in the night air. The town lights dim in your mind until they're only dots. The arguments quiet, the saws stop, the bottles stop clinking. Even the word humors drifts away like a dream you won't remember in the morning. You're left with the simplest thing: people trying to care for each other, even when their tools are crude and their theories are wrong. Hands on foreheads, water offered, blankets pulled up, a steady voice saying, "You're not alone." So as you settle into that calmer space, you let the past become distant, not threatening, just quiet. You let your breathing slow. You let the night feel safe again. You imagine the wind moving over fields, over rivers, over rooftops, carrying away the last sharp edges of the story. And as the darkness softens around you, you give yourself permission to stop worrying about blood bowls and lancets and strange remedies. That world is far behind you now. You're here, you're warm, you're safe. End of script. Sweet dreams.